This is, today is June 7th, and this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Brookline School Committee. Our committee member, Susan Ditkoff, is still away, and our committee member, Julie Schreiner Oldham, is attending school activities and will be here shortly. She said shortly after 7 o'clock, and will join us tonight. We have our calendar. As everyone can notice, it's shorter. We're getting close to the end of school. There still are subcommittee meetings. There's still one more regularly scheduled school committee meeting on Tuesday the 19th. There are also one or two joint meetings of the school committee with the select board and the advisory committee ad hoc subcommittee to discuss the school site, K-8 school expansion, site selection, study, and possible decision making. So that's there was a meeting that we'll talk about later. Last night, a public hearing at the high school on Wednesday night. Next Wednesday night, we will convene upstairs on the 6th floor in the select board's hearing room to begin discussions with the other boards on our own thinking and what we heard from the community last night. There is also a meeting of the BHS expansion school building committee on the 14th, and a meeting of the ad hoc task force on school naming on the 11th. And in a couple of weeks, on on the June 20th and 21st? I thought they were all on.
Driscoll's the 20th.
Oh, Driscoll is on the 20th, right.
And all the rest on the 20th.
And all the rest on the 20th. We have all of our elementary school graduations, which we will, to the extent that we are available, I'll be taking part in, and those are great celebrations. I'm looking forward to that afternoon and those celebrations. We will now take public comment. Yes, calendar, yes. Ms. Charlepsky.
Just two things. One, to highlight, I can't remember if you highlighted the 30-year teacher event.
I did not. Go ahead.
5:30, and it'd really be great if everybody could get here on time to meet the teachers who have been and worked in the system for 30 years. It's really a great event. Number one.
Prior to our next meeting on the Tuesday the 19th.
Correct. And number two, in the fall, and I don't remember what date, it's a Friday night in September, the Brookline Education Foundation has the Margaret Metzger Fellows presentation of their work, their summer work. These are teachers in the system who talk about their experiences as teachers. And it's actually a fascinating evening. I went one time. And it's really, it makes you really get to know who our teachers are. So I would highly recommend it. Usually it's at the Lincoln School in the auditorium there.
Thank you. We will now take public comment. Is there anyone who has signed up for public comment? No. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment? Seeing none, we will continue with our agenda. We are going to start with a discussion of the school renaming process for what is now the Coolidge, has an interim name of the Coolidge Corner School.
I actually don't have a long update of the process because part of the process in determining next steps includes a meeting with the school's PTO leaders. We weren't able to get that on the books until tomorrow. I believe we're meeting at 10 or 10:30. And at that conversation, or at that meeting, I'm going to discuss, we're first going to discuss the most pressing needs that the PTO has. In particular, what resources in terms of money are tied up in devotion school gear, how many sort of sweatshirts and T-shirts, and what are they thinking, the PTO, in terms of building community and spirit around the Coolidge Corner for the Coolidge Corner School name, but also in anticipating needing a whole new set of gear a year from now. So we're going to talk that through. There's some ideas that we both have, both the PTO leaders and I, about some business sponsorship to mitigate costs, support for the community, but mitigating the expense both for the PTO most importantly and for the town secondarily. So that conversation is happening tomorrow, as well as a discussion about suggestions that the PTO leaders have about process for submitting names. And then next week, I think I had mentioned last week that I had reached out to members of the PTO, in particular Shauna Betoff, who has been at all of the school committee meetings and public hearings regarding the name, to be really a link in communication with the Coolidge Corner community, Coolidge Corner school community throughout this process. In a similar way that parent representatives serve on the building committee. So both bringing perspective and information, ideas, voice to the process, but also being a critical back and forth in terms of giving and collecting information. So Shauna and I are meeting next Tuesday at 4:15, and we're going to discuss both ideas for renaming, possible steps for submission of names for the general public broadly at large, and then I anticipate a process quickly that Shauna and I will discuss to quickly try and get some immediate feedback from the Coolidge Corner school community about that process. So those two meetings are happening tomorrow and Tuesday. In terms of the schools, Lower Coolidge Corner has finalized their plans for next week. The initial conversations that will be had with students. They have social stories that they've developed. They have some videos that they've found to talk about the process of change, and as well as some lesson plans that have been put together. So that will be happening next week. The lower team is communicating those with staff. With families on Friday. Upper Coolidge Corner also has a plan, and I've been at Upper twice in the last 2 days, and both times because was involved in such amazing opportunities for students. Did not actually get the information from Principal Crowley, and when I tried to connect with her this afternoon, we were unable to connect. So the plans are set. I don't have them for the committee. I apologize for that, and I'll forward that to you in an email. So by the 19th, I will have, before the meeting on the 19th, we'll have a written draft of a timeline proposal. I think most importantly, and I think what will take some time over the summer and in the fall, early fall, first week of September maybe, late August primarily, is working with our curriculum coordinators, in particular to how to support a process whereby all students can be invited to submit names. And so I've connected at a very high level with our curriculum coordinators, but have not had none of us have had the chance to talk the details yet. So that's all of the stuff is beginning. I was hoping to have more done since last Thursday's meeting, but Thursday to Thursday was pretty quick this week. So the process will continue, and you will have a written draft with all of this input, and after all the information I have from these meetings before the meeting on the 19th, so that you can then discuss and give me feedback on steps that you would also like to see included in the process.
Mrs. Scotto.
I was glad to hear you talk about the fact that the students were going to be talking about change, because they're undergoing a great deal of change moving back to the new school, and there's also going to be a change in terms of the school name. And I wonder what is being done to think about curriculum related to this that would possibly be developed over the summer.
Well, I think
whether that's happening.
That's a great question, and I think that's a question I want to take to Jeff Tegnell, our history curriculum coordinator. Jeff has such a long track record of working with educators to develop curriculum, and I personally envision something that takes sort of several days of students learning about both the process of government, in particular our form of government with town meeting and citizen petitions, and how a small group can bring change. That's actually the video that the teachers have selected for kids. It's how 1 or 2 or 3 people can actually bring forth significant change. It doesn't require you being in the video. It's a 7 or 8 year old speaking, or maybe a 6-year-old, saying you don't need to be president to bring change. You don't need to be a sports superstar. You don't need to be sort of a billionaire. You need to have an idea, and you need to have heart, and you need to bring that forward and share that idea. So a very small conversation will happen with kids next week based on that. I do envision something that Jeff Tegnell coordinates and develops and makes available. And I know he will do that in collaboration with teachers. And so I will be taking that question to Jeff, and we'll bring back information to the committee about that.
DOE and MSBA.
We have submitted to the state or requested what we need to change the name with the state. So Aaron Cooley is going to move that process forward. And we're going to find out if there's anything we need to change with the MSBA. One building committee member is hopeful that we don't need to change anything and can finish the project and get our reimbursement.
They won't know where to send the check. That would be a problem.
But we are looking into what we need to do, if there's anything we need to do, and the MSBA outreach we're doing in conjunction with the building department, since they are actually the department building the school.
Okay, so we'll pick up this discussion with more sort of information, particularly from the school community, at our meeting on the 19th. And because I do think that then talking about how the school committee fulfills its central role of being responsible for developing. I mean, it sits with us to develop essentially come up with the name that we want to then move through the town's naming committee to town meeting, so we need to figure out how we're going to do that. But I do think it'll be really valuable to hear back from the Coolidge Corner School community about what their current thinking is about it, and as well as some of these other pieces in order to support our discussion. Excellent. So we're on to you, Mr. Lummis, and the 2018 Family and Staff Feedback Survey results. And Ms. Cooley.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. For those of you who I haven't met yet, some new committee members, my name is Erin Cooley. I am the Director of Data Analysis and Information Management here for Brookline. We're here today to talk to you about our staff and family survey results. So you should have a packet or a printout of what I'm presenting you today, which also includes a pretty long appendix of some additional details, sort of item level results, question level results that we were not able to present in the allotted time today, but that we thought might be interesting for you all, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about those at a later time. So just a quick overview, and this should look really familiar to those of you who were here last year. We have 3 different survey types in the district here. So we have a survey for school staff, so those are teachers and school-based employees. We also have a survey for district staff, so those are principals, vice principals, folks who work here in Town Hall, who work at Webster or at the SEC, like curriculum coordinators, different department staff, secretaries, etc. And then we have the survey for families. So we use this survey to gather feedback from those important stakeholder groups that I mentioned, and we also use it to reflect at both the school and our system level on areas of strength and areas for improvement. And that's really the way that we've set up this presentation today. You'll see in the upcoming slides, we really split up the presentation by those different types of really strengths and areas for improvement in the different grade spans. Schools can use their results when they're developing their school improvement plans. Both Ben and Andrew will talk to you a little bit about how schools are or have been using this data since it's been released to them this year and how they plan on using it moving forward in the upcoming summer and school year. Just quickly on some administration details, we've still contracted with Panorama Education. They actually support about 500 different districts throughout the country, 8,500 schools or something like that. It's an online survey. All responses are anonymous, regardless of whether it's family or staff. We do make translations available for families, so we send all communication, whether it's from Superintendent Bott or from the survey vendor itself, in the language that families have requested when they register their child for school, and the survey is also translated for them as well. This year we sent the survey during a 3-week window in, I guess, the winter of 2018. We started the survey right after February vacation, ended right before, I guess, the last week in March. We talked to Panorama a lot about when is the best time to administer a survey. And they say that most districts or schools that are administering one survey throughout the year really do it in that kind of February, March time frame. They have some schools that have surveys twice a year, so they can do kind of like a pre-post. And in that instance, they'll delay the administration of that second survey a little bit later. But for our purposes, using it once, we're kind of consistent with what their other districts are administering. So again, this should look similar to last year as well. This is just some information around how the responses are scored for our survey. So we split the survey up into topic areas or categories. Depending on the survey type will really depend on how many topic areas or categories there are. You can see there, if you're a teacher, you'll answer questions about 9 different topics. If you're a district staff, you'll answer questions about 2 different topics, and families 5 to 6, depending on the school level. Results are shared by topic area, so in summary, in aggregate, and then by individual question or individual item. And you'll see that as we go throughout our presentation tonight. So we report our survey in what we call percent favorable. So that indicates the percentage of respondents who are answering positively to a question. So if you think about that 5-point scale, it's that 4 or 5 on that scale. So the example I have for you there is actually an item from our survey. To what extent does this school have a strong sense of community? The 2 responses or answer choices in blue are what we would consider favorable. So before we go into the actual results, I want to share a little bit more about the response rates for both our family and our staff survey. What you'll see here in that second row are all of the staff that were invited to participate in the survey. We have that broken down for you by school-based staff and central administration, central staff. The number of staff that responded, which yielded a response rate of 62% for our staff survey, which is a 4% increase from our previous year. You see I also have that school-based range there, so the response rates for our schools range between 49% and 78%, depending on the school. And then for our families, it's a little bit more difficult to calculate that response rate. We send it out to family members that are kind of like the top 2. So a mother and a father, for example, would have the opportunity to respond to a survey. So it gets sent out to 12,000 or so individuals, which is approximately 5,000 households. Which this year yielded a response rate of 20%. And that school-based range is 16 to 25% for the family survey. You'll see that change from 2007, decreased 6 percentage points from last year. I can talk to you a little bit about why we think that is. But I know last year you all had some questions around what is 20% or 26% at that time? Is that good? We talked to Panorama about that as well. And they really say that their districts and schools that they work with, their family results, the response rates are really within that 20 to 30% range. It's pretty consistent with what they're seeing in other schools and other districts. Some of the things we talked to them about this year in terms of like how can we increase our response rates is potentially backpacking a letter home. So we send all of our communication for the survey via email unless a family requests to do a paper copy of it. We're thinking about maybe backpacking a letter home from Superintendent Bott next year saying, like, getting them ready for the survey. Also, we did have some schools this year ask us if they could, on a family or an open house night, have computers available for families to take the survey. So that's something that we might think about for next year too, to try and increase that response rate. And we've been talking with Panorama the last 3 years, I guess, around how to get this number a little bit higher. Yep. I don't mind.
Just a technical question.
Sure.
So is 62% considered average for staff, or is
Yeah, so I can tell you a little bit about what Panorama says the other districts that they work with, other schools that they work with. They say that 62% is a little bit lower than theirs. Most districts are in the 70 to 80% range that they work with. However, those districts, they say, mandate the survey, make it a requirement for teachers. I've spoken with some other data directors, too, around the area who say that when they mandate it or they make it a requirement, the results are higher versus when they don't. Obviously, they're lower. So we're seeing that increase, which I think is really important to note, too. And again, next year we'll hopefully have that increase again. And just the amount of preparation that we can give to teachers and staff saying, like, this is upcoming and this is how we're using it. You'll hear a little bit more from Ben and Superintendent Bott about how we're using it this year. And I think if folks start to really see that we're using the information and we're really taking their voice into consideration, that rate will just get higher and higher as we go.
Have you had any discussion with Panorama about how people's feelings affect their likelihood to respond? In other words, if I'm really unhappy with the school system, I am pretty likely to tell you that, to respond. If things are going smoothly and everything is fine, I might be, I might or I might not respond, depending on how much time I have. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of data about who responds and why.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really hard to know, right? Because it's a personal preference by either staff or families. In terms of doing some analysis to see whether or not, I think, again, that might be a school-by-school basis, looking at their results. If there are certain questions that are really high or really low, that's what principals, that's what district leaders are doing, thinking about, like, why that might be. And there may have been an incident that happened at the school or at the district level in that 3-week window that we may say, oh, that might be why. And then we start asking our staff whether or not that's why they filled out the survey that way. So I think we won't really know the answers to those through, like, statistical analysis, but we'll know the answers through conversations, that we have with staff or with families about their feelings.
You mentioned that in other districts it's mandatory. Has there been any consideration to making it mandatory here? And if so, why or why not?
We have not talked about that. I don't know if Superintendent Bob wants.
It's a fair question. We haven't made it mandatory in the past, but we have discussed. So I think I'm going to digress for a moment, and then I will answer your question. To Ms. Scotto's question, folks have raised that question, but really what school leaders are looking at is the information for what it is. There are strengths in the individual question responses, and there are things that school leaders and I are deeply dissatisfied with. And we're taking it for the face value of what it is. We're not trying to come up with reasons to sort of explain away. And what Ms. Cooley described is not explain it away. Sometimes we have to understand the context. So that being said, Mr. Perlman, the question has come up from principals. Could we designate a faculty meeting, in one of the 2 February faculty meetings where everybody simply takes it? And I think that we can, and there seems to be some building consensus that would be more helpful, because then we actually, as we're responding, we get, we have sort of all of the information there. So that's the conversation that's happening now.
Also, I'm curious, is there space for just sort of general comments that can be given? Because one concern that I have that others have raised with me is when you have mostly multiple choice options, you don't necessarily get as firm a grasp as a certain patterns that might develop in what the concerns might be, or also positives, but just leaving it sort of open for people to provide their own impressions.
Yeah, there are open responses. I think it's part of Ms. Cooley's presentation. I think that you raise a really good point because you start through the open responses. Sometimes what's important is the interpretation of a term in the question, and people have different definitions of what something means, and you can actually start seeing that. Schools, as they start looking at this and using it, can see what's coming through in the comments. There's not a lot of open responses.
Yeah, there's two specific questions they ask you. If what's one thing you really value about the school that you work at, or the district that you work at, or the school that your child attends. The other is if you could change one thing or two things about the school you attend or the school that you work at. What would that be? And so that yields a variety of responses that we can see.
I have a quick question. Do we know, Erin, of the responses from families, the 2,400, do we know how many of those are, how many households those are from?
Yeah, so up there you can see, I don't have it there. I could get back to you on that. Yeah, we could figure that out.
I'm just
certainly.
wondering because.
Yeah, I can tell you that I have looked at the distribution of responses just by different subgroups, so by our race ethnicity subgroup, and the distribution looks fairly similar to our district distribution. So when we're presenting these results, at least at the district level, we can be confident that it's fairly representative of families in our district. Okay, so now we're going to move on to share. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to echo the idea about providing opportunities at school events for parents to participate in giving feedback, and whether it's some sort of like a curriculum night or portfolio night or some other draw for parents or high attendance, and possibly looking into school councils and PTO support or promotion of participation, especially in the context of how the data is actually being utilized and as an opportunity for them to express things that are going really well, things that they like, but also concerns or areas of growth that they might see, and would encourage, if we want teachers to participate, providing them time not in their regular planning time to have the opportunity to provide the feedback.
Thank you. Yeah, I can tell you that this year and last year, I believe we did send a message to the PTOs letting them know that the administration was happening. I also send school leaders response rates as the survey is being administered. So every couple of days, I'll let them know what their family and staff rate is so they can encourage their staff and families to respond as well. Okay. So now I'm going to show you a little bit more detail around the results. We're going to stay at that high level. We're going to stay at that topic or category level to begin, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper. So what you have here is looking at our overall results by topic for the staff survey. So this is going to be school staff, so those teachers or school level employees. On the far left hand are all of the different topic areas. I believe there's 9 there that those staff answer questions about. And then the columns to the right, you'll see the percent favorable for the BEEP staff, for K-8 staff, and for BHS staff in those first 3 columns. What I've done for you is highlighted in green the highest percent favorable for each of the school levels, and in red the lowest percent favorable for each of the school levels. So you can see that in BEEP, staff-family relationships is really high amongst staff. In K-8, educating all students. At BHS, educating all students is really high. And we'll talk a little bit later about what some of the questions are that are within those categories. And then if you look at the red coloring, you'll see that professional learning is the lowest percent favorable in the BEEP schools, and then feedback for K-8 and BHS, which is something we talked about last year, something we'll talk a little bit more about this year as well. The columns, if you keep going to the right, the columns are going to show you the change from last year's administration. So you'll notice that for school staff specifically, staff who work in our BEEP locations are all increasing their percent favorable from 2017, whereas we don't really see that same impact in K-8 and at the high school. And as we continue our conversation tonight, we'll talk a little bit more about those. The results here are going to show you the topic categories for our district staff. So those are the employees that work here at Town Hall, at Webster, at the SEC, curriculum coordinators, directors, secretaries, etc. The first topic there, it's kind of poorly named. It's called District Office Staff Questions. We will definitely think about changing that for next year. All of these questions are based on the Gallup 12, if that's something that you're familiar with. They're really primarily talking about satisfaction in your job, engagement, relationship with your colleagues, relationships with your supervisors. And you can see there that the percent favorable from our district staff is 60%, which is an increase of 1% from 2017. The next category is going to be district climate. So these are 5 questions based on the experiences that staff are having with district leaders and their overall working environment. Just to note, all staff, regardless of location, receive these same 5 questions. We're just able to split it up for you between school staff and district staff, and we'll share a little bit more about those numbers towards the end of the presentation today. And you can see that change from 2017.
Do we know the number of responses for district staff?
Yeah, so the number of district staff responses is 97, so just under 100.
We know the percentage of...
Out of 114, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It must have been high. Yeah.
And I just, Mr. Lummis is going to speak more in depth about this, but I both have a deep sense of frustration and dismay at the drop in district climate. And it comes down, again, Mr. Lummis will talk in more depth, but it has to do with trust that people will follow through on what they say they will do. And it also has to do with communication and more effectively communicating with district staff from district leadership. So, again, Mr. Lummis will talk through the steps that we're taking, but this is if you can't see the impact that this has on me, this is just unacceptable from my perspective, for a district to operate in a way where people feel that they're not getting the support and follow through, and it is an incredibly high priority to fix. In fact, we are working actively already on fixing that. So that the questions in the do you enjoy working in the district? Do you feel that you have the resources to do your job, which are actually quite high, relatively speaking, so that we get a match in that. So again, Mr. Lummis will talk more in depth, but I just didn't want this slide to go past without me really being able to put at least that card on the table for the committee to know that this is deeply problematic and is receiving both a lot of attention and incredible hard work to change that.
I'm going to show you these same results for the family survey. So again, this is the topic level. There's 5 there for BEEP and 6 there for the other school levels. Again, highlighting in green the highest percent favorable in each school level, and in red the lowest percent favorable in each school level. So you can see at BEEP, 95% of families are responding favorably to questions in the school fit category. At K-8, those are questions around school climate, and at the high school, those are questions around communications. If you look at those boxes colored in red, in BEEP, you can see the lowest is district climate at 70%. I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. At K-8, that's family engagement at 44%, and similarly at the high school, family engagement at 30%. A little bit different here as you keep going to the right, looking at those changes from 2017. Unlike the staff survey, where BEEP was the only school level who had those increases from 2017. You'll see those increases, especially in the communications and district climate topic areas for both K-8 and BHS. So a little bit different experiences, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation as well. Questions? Okay. So we're going to go into an overview of our results by school level. Obviously, the high school is one school. K-8s are representative of all of our K-8s, and the BEEP data is going to be representative of all the BEEP locations, regardless of which school staff or families attend. The way that we've set this up for you, I talked a little bit about it in the beginning, is we're going to show you an area of strength and an area for improvement in each of the topics for each of the school levels for both the family survey and the staff survey. As I've been mentioning all along, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what school leaders and district leaders are doing about these results now and what they plan on doing again throughout the summer and next school year. So really just going over the results, and we'll talk a little bit more in the following slides about what we're going to do based upon them. So we'll start with the high school, and we'll start with our staff results at the high school. So all of these slides are presented the same way, where your area of strength is on the left-hand side and your area for improvement is on the right-hand side. We've highlighted for you staff leadership relationships here as an area of strength, primarily because of that asterisk you see underneath the 69% that says that this percent favorable has increased 29% since 2016, where it was 40% favorable. So even though we're seeing that decrease from 2017 to 2018 of 6%, this is still one of the highest areas for the high school in the staff survey, and one that has really increased over time. So you'll see the sample of questions that are part of that staff leadership relationships topic area below. I'm not going to read all of them for you, but they're really around how respectful their school leaders are towards them. Do they feel supported by the school? Is there trust between the school leaders and staff? And as we move to the right, we see our area for improvement is professional learning at 31% favorable, which is a decrease of 8 percentage points from last year. So those questions there are asking staff really about professional development opportunities that are either given by the school or by the district, and how they feel that their opportunities help them explore new ideas. And so we can see that this is definitely an area of growth. You'll see not only for the high school, but for the district as well. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing in that area, not only for the high school, but for all schools. Sticking with the high school, looking at our family results now, we've highlighted school climate as their area of strength at 70% favorable, which has increased 6% since our 2016 administration. These questions are really around whether really families believe students enjoy going to school, what's the sense of community, is there a positive culture at the high school, is your child engaged in appropriately challenging levels of academics. And so that's a really high number, and something that we really wanted to highlight for you at the high school. Their area improvement that we selected here is school safety at 53%. There's really only 2 questions there in that school safety topic area. And I wanted to just point out to you there that we only see the decrease from 2017 because in 2016 we actually asked those questions a little bit differently. So we can't really compare. We can't compare the years. So 53% of families are really answering questions about bullying here and saying, around only half of students are feeling safe from bullying. Any questions about the high school before I move? Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing for our K-8 staff results. Again, their area of strength on the left-hand side, their area for improvement on the right. We selected teaching efficacy for you as an area of strength at 61% favorable. Similar to our high school area of strength for staff, we're noting that it is decreasing since 2016, but 61 is still one of the highest areas or topic areas for this survey for staff. This is really asking them questions about their own confidence, how effective teachers feel in the classroom. Can they manage classrooms that are typically disruptive, or students that are typically not motivated? How confident they feel in instructing either students with disabilities or students with different cultural backgrounds in them. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to highlight this too is while 61 is one of the highest topic areas for K-8, it's also, as we see that decrease since 2016, I think it's an area of opportunity for the district Office of Teaching and Learning, principals really talking to staff about these questions and how they're responding to these questions, and thinking about what can we offer to staff to make them feel a little bit more confident in these areas.
I just want to step in. I apologize for interrupting because I promised I wouldn't until it was my turn to speak. But this raises a really important question. In some initial conversations that have happened to try and get more information about this question, there's a particular drop in the series of questions. And the sample is not actually all of them. In teaching efficacy, I think
there's a lot of them.
12 to 14 questions. And we're seeing a particular drop in self-identified efficacy for teaching students from diverse backgrounds, race, and ethnicity. And I think the theory that principals are sort of testing, testing is the wrong word, are exploring and going to explore with staff is, as we've talked more about the challenges that we have in meeting the needs, and we have disparate outcomes for students that is linked in many ways to race and ethnicity, are we now identifying them so we understand the challenge, and now we need the steps. Like there's a theory of, now that we understand the challenge better, we are reflective in sort of how we are, differently reflective in how we're answering this question, which hits home to Ms. Cooley's point that it now is, so now what do we do? Like what is the next step? And the other area, some of our schools have had some particularly complex kiddos, and it's something that Casey No Miller is focusing on, and has actually been in conversations with staff post-budget process since she took over in the role, about like what resources need to be deployed in those schools, what are ways that she and her team can redeploy resources, given some of the changes in, again, complexity, right? It's just, they're all great kids, but some of our kids, and in particular in some of our schools, we're just seeing more complexity that even last year over the previous year. And so Casey's engaging in that work, because in other areas where your school communities where you didn't necessarily see a drop in efficacy in teaching all learners based on race and ethnicity, you see a drop based on disability. So that's just, I'll speak more about all of the other things when it's my turn, but I wanted to highlight that because I think it's important context at this point in the presentation.
And then the area for improvement that we wanted to highlight for you for K-8 staff is feedback at 21% favorable. This has decreased 10% since 2016, where it was only at 31% favorable during that year. So this is asking school staff how thorough the feedback is that they receive in covering aspects of their teaching. How often do they receive feedback, whether that's formal or informal, on their teaching, and how much they learn from the evaluation process at their school. Again, this is just a sampling of questions, but something that we talked about last year that we'll continue to talk about this year. Moving on to the family. Oh, sorry, did you have a question?
It was just a clarifying question
Yeah, sure.
because I don't know the answer. Are all the questions in that category, the area for improvement of feedback, are they all questions about the feedback that they receive in evaluations, or is it also responsiveness to feedback that they give? Or is that in a separate category, or is it both?
It's both of those things. So it's not just about the evaluation process. And one of the things that we actually did this year was, you'll see that second bullet where it says, how often do you receive feedback, formal or informal? We made that change, formal or informal, so that it was really, or hopefully really clear to respondents that we're not just talking about the evaluation process, that we're talking about, all forms of feedback.
Does it also include questions about feedback that teachers give?
That's
You
in
know what I'm saying? Or is
different area.
That's in a different
That's
yeah.
different. Okay.
Yeah.
In a different category.
Yeah, there's a category, staff leadership relationships, where that shows up. So as we move to the K-8,
Is there anything under teaching efficacy that deals with class size? Because as you get more students, it can certainly affect teaching efficacy. And I'm wondering if we're thinking at all or looking at all at the effect of class size on teacher efficacy.
Yeah, so there's no specific question that says, how confident are you in teaching if you have a class that is X size. There is a question around how confident you are teaching a class or a student that is oftentimes disruptive, but that's a little bit different, I imagine, than what you're getting at. So no, I can write that down for sure.
There's also the diverse range.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's a question around how confident you are in teaching a diverse range of learners, whether that's at the scale where kids are higher in that learning scale or lower in that learning scale. Again, I'm not sure if that's really getting at like the size aspect. All right. So here's a look at our overall family results for K-8. So we're highlighting, again, school climate here, similar to the high school, 71%. I believe the high school was 70%. It's really hovered around this range since 2016 when we started the survey. Same types of questions that we saw at the high school level. Are students enjoying going to school? Do they feel a sense of community? Is there a positive culture? And that's really high, similar to the comments I made at the high school. Our area for improvement there, you're probably going to wonder why we put that there with that huge 13 percentage point increase, but 57% of families are responding favorably to questions about communication, which has increased 3% since 2016. I do want to highlight that 13 is primarily because we changed around the question choices or the options for the question about the parent portal. So if you remember last year, we had a question that asked families how often they were using the parent portal to get information about their child. And what we basically did was move all of the questions up one and have what you would consider 1 on a scale of 1 to 5 be the answer choice. I don't know what the parent portal is. So it essentially kind of moved up a lot of the responses. That's why we're seeing that increase there. But what we wanted to do was highlight communications there at 57% favorable, because most of the questions, aside from that parent portal one, are asking how clearly the school leader communicates their goals for the school, how timely the feedback is that teachers are able to provide to families about their child's learning, how well they know their child is doing in school before they get their report card or progress report. So it's really all about the communication that's happening between teachers or school leaders and families. I see a question. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the surveys are translated into the preferred language of each family.
Yeah.
Just looking at these communication numbers, to what extent is that done for other types of communications with parents?
Yeah, so someone else might be able to speak to this a little bit better, but I know that, at least in the administration of the survey or any of the documentation that my team gives out around MCAS results are all translated into the language that families ask for when they register. I don't know.
The honest answer is not nearly enough, and it is an area we need to improve in. It's a complex area. It's a costly area, but those are simply excuses that we have to figure out so that we can communicate more frequently in many That is definitely an area of growth for the district.
Any other questions about K-8 before we move to BEEP? All right, so same setup. Here are our results for staff at the BEEP locations. Again, we're highlighting school climate here as an area of strength for staff. The other highlights around school climate were all about families, so these ones are all staff reported around school climate. You see that increase of 14 percentage points since 2016, where they were at 70% favorable, which was already really high. For staff answering questions about climate, this is really all about the culture of collaboration at the school amongst educators and colleagues, how respectful relationships are between staff and students, whether the working environment is positive at their school. So we've seen this in other years reporting BEEP results as well.
What happens when there's only one BEEP class in a school? Do they then report on the school they're in, or on BEEP, or are they part of BEEP? It's not a lot of people, but I was just curious.
I will ask Principal Milstein that question. My belief, based on conversations that I've had, is that people are reporting their collaboration within BEEP. There are a lot of opportunities built into the year where everyone comes together, in fact, in this classroom. In this room. So I believe that is referencing the collaboration among the early childhood educators. I can ask Ms. Milstein to clarify that for you.
And then our area for improvement for BEEP staff, we've highlighted professional learning at 57% favorable. You see that increase 14% since 2016. So that's something that we should really applaud them for too, and really talk to, again, Ms. Milstein around, what has she been doing, because these numbers are very different than the staff results for our K-8 and for our high school. Same questions that we saw in the high school staff results. How valuable are the professional development opportunities? What extent are your ideas and suggestions for improvement encouraged? Those are the type of questions that folks are responding to here. And finally, as we look at the family results for BEEP, we've highlighted School Fit for You at 95% favorable, which is an increase of 4% since 2016. Families are really feeling like their child feel a sense of belonging in the BEEP program, feel that BEEP is really preparing their child for kindergarten, and feel like their individual needs are being met in that program. If we had to choose an area for improvement here, we're highlighting family engagement, 80% favorable. Again, it's been increasing since 2016 when we first administered the survey. These questions are around how often families have visited school, how easy it is to talk to their child's teachers, how accessible the BEEP administrative team is. Before I pass it along, does anyone have any other questions about kind of the data itself, the administration of the survey? We're going to talk a little bit more about now what's next. So I just want to make sure there's space for that, and I can do that at the end as well if needed.
I have a question. Have we considered, or do we get feedback surveys with students, from students?
Not yet.
That would be something I would love to have a conversation sometime.
Yeah, we do
I think it's an important conversation to have.
Does Panorama have a
Yes.
piece for students?
Yep, they have, similar to both family and staff, they have a research-based tool with research-based questions that we can partner with them on that too.
Why haven't we done it?
We just haven't. It's not something we've started, and I think it's a question that we can bring to the committee, probably the questions and
Yeah.
engage. You can engage in a discussion about that survey.
I think it would be great. I mean, I do remember in the past we've done the tripod survey, which gave us some information about minority students and how they felt about the schools, but I don't know if we've ever done one for all students, and I think it's a great idea.
I'll work with the chair to think about when we can bring, perhaps we could even start a discussion at the summer workshop. I'll work with the chair and with Ms. Cooley to see if we can bring at least the available questions to start a conversation.
All right, I'll be back at the end to present a little bit more data, but I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you. So we're going to focus on areas for district improvement. School was talking about the 94 folks out of 117, I think, who responded to the district questions of district staff, and that's what this will focus on here. So we're going to zero in on district climate. We've already seen this data point, 39% earlier. Superintendent Bott spoke about it very clearly in terms of how troubling this was for us to see this results. Last year, as you can see, a significant improvement from questions such as, you see on the bottom of them, how helpful are district leaders in providing support, do your job well, to what extent do you trust the district leaders to do what they say they will do, and how successful are district leaders in communicating important information to staff. Those are 3 of, I believe, 7 or 8 questions in this category. So in terms of, and so this specifically is digging down into the communication question. How successful are district leaders in communicating important information to staff? So this is the type of result we get for every single question that we ask. You see the up top, you've seen the summary, they responded favorably, which Aaron talked about. You see the answer distribution on the left there, with the 2 green bars on the bottom being the most highly rated or the favorable ones. And so by looking at this question, some of the others, what's senior leadership, so so Nicole Gittins, Mary Ellen Dunn, Superintendent Bott, Casey Miller, myself, really wanted to look into this and look across all the questions in this area on district climate. And in doing so, we asked ourselves a bunch of questions. Which are the most important? Which ones are connected? We tried to understand, how did one lead to the other, or were some centered around the same concept? And what we also knew is that we felt we didn't have enough information to really understand what the quantitative data and even the open responses were telling us. So as a result of that, we've decided, because the communications seems to be touching on a number of them, to use as a focus area. What's happening this week is each member of senior leadership is working with our departments and speaking with our managers, some of our direct reports, and ask them questions about communication to understand, to get more data, more information about what the survey tells us. So in this case, the survey is a beginning point. We're using it as a beginning point. And you can see the types of questions we're asking those folks directly. So, like I did it with, Aaron and I worked with our team this morning, asking questions like, what isn't working well with communications and what can we do differently to communicate better? And the result of that, of these conversations that the 5 of us are having, are very open and honest exchange about what would be helpful, what isn't going well with communications. And I think a growing understanding, from these, I'll just talk about our team this morning, about what communications means on which levels and to what extent, and when do folks want to be involved, and when is it okay for them not to be involved. That's just a long way of saying is by having these conversations, we're digging much more deeply into the data and understanding what people are, and wanting to understand what people are really saying in the communication and what will help them. Let me stop there. Some folks have some questions.
Ms. Charlevsky and then Ms. Federspiel.
Thank you. So one thought I had, and I'm not sure how much flexibility we have with this questionnaire and stuff, but is there a way of asking that question, especially in the ones where there's 25% for the next time, to ask, if you've scored us under 4 or 3, 1 through 3, could you give some suggestions of how we might improve? So you have that sort of, anonymously throughout. It might help to move it even faster and better, because sometimes it's hard to say one-on-one to somebody what the problem is. And
I think it's an interesting suggestion. We have had a lot of requests on open response. Some of them coming, shouldn't every question be open response? We're a little hesitant to do that because that'd be very hard to decipher all that and read through that, especially when thousands of people are doing it. I think that's an interesting concept. I will also, though, at the same time speak of the tremendous value of having having those face-to-face conversations. And they've been open and honest so far from the ones that I've talked to people about, and they need to be. If we can't, in those situations, have open and honest conversations, whether it's with a small group or even at one-to-one, then that's a real indicator of other issues, deeper issues. So I think it's an interesting suggestion.
I think you should do both. I
Yeah,
don't think
yes.
they're mutually exclusive
Right.
necessarily. But thank you.
Yeah, great. No problem.
Dan, could you just explain, go back?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Go back one.
Yep.
So this is communications for the district staff. So those are those 97 people that are leadership, right, central or school. And so it says how successful are district leaders in communicating important information to staff, to school staff?
These 97.
So how?
So this is specifically a question of how successful are the folks that Mr. Lummis named, the deputy superintendents,
Really senior
yes, in communicating to that district level staff.
Okay.
And the one-on-one conversations are really important because we, for another reason, because the anonymity of the survey, we don't know, is this clustered in various departments? Is this spread evenly? And so that's information that we're able to find out. Sort of coincidentally or interestingly, not coincidentally, interestingly, after the survey was administered, Mr. Lummis and I were finally able to begin implementing something that I had wanted to start at the beginning of the year, which is a weekly update for principals that actually compiled all of the important information in one spot rather than multiple emails that often get missed. And the feedback we got when I asked this question of principals on Monday, we had a long conversation about communication and what types of communications do principals need. Folks actually highlighted that as a strength and asked for a sort of an additional at our weekly meeting, if we could just do sort of a 10-minute update on, like, here are the things that happened at different schools in case you hear, right? So there's actually, it's two levels of information. So that was really important feedback because it's certainly not easy to put that out every week, but we've been doing it. And so to get the feedback that actually is of value was good feedback.
Just to clarify, do our school administrators report directly to you, superintendent?
Principals do, yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
And then just also add, we ask the same questions that are in this category, we ask of school staff as well. So it's worded the same way. And
On their survey?
Yeah, and we'll show you in a little bit that there's actually quite a bit difference
Okay,
between
thank you.
the district staff response and the school staff response. Yeah, great. So just to follow this up, so we have those initial conversations, and then we've also asked managers to have, or directors to have, that same conversation or communication with their staff. So let me just give you a for instance, which is pretty easy to understand. So Dr. Gittens has spoke yesterday with coordinators and directors, okay, and had this type of conversation with them, which I talked to her earlier today. She was pretty excited about. But she's also asked then coordinators to talk to their staff, specialists or coaches, to ask them the same questions to get input from them as well. And she will then reconvene with her team of coordinators and directors and have the conversation, fully, basically. So the idea is that communication is certainly a major responsibility of the 5 senior leadership members, but as well, it's a responsibility of many of us.
And I think it's also there's important reminders that when I send something to principals, I should also send it to coordinators, and so that's important feedback for me to get. That I'll send something out and it then someone else forwards it, right? So there's just sort of simple. Once you get into the habit of it and change that messaging behavior. I can own the responsibility for not having done that and improving in how that's done.
But theoretically, their supervisors, the coordinators, are not you directly, but Dr. Gittens or whoever it might be. Do we have an org chart somewhere?
We do, and I will give it to the committee.
So now,
Perhaps with a proposed change or two at the summer workshop.
Okay, great, thank you.
So now Superintendent Bott will talk about areas for school improvement and highlight his conversations he's been having with principals related to the data.
So at this point, I've met one-on-one with each principal to review the staff and family survey results at length. Where there's a transition, I've also met with the incoming principal at Lawrence to share the current Lawrence family and staff results, so that Ms. Crowley actually has both Upper Coolidge Corner and Lawrence information. So in these conversations, each principal has selected or begun to select a focus area that's important to them. They've also put together draft plans for how to actually engage in a conversation of what are the important areas with faculty. So that sort of self-selected focus area can and likely will change in instances as those conversations happen. Given where we are in the year, some schools will have these conversations this month. All schools will have it before students arrive, but in some schools, this work will happen on the 4th or the 5th, and not. We actually, because we had 5 snow days, because somebody called 5 snow days. The last faculty meeting, while school doesn't end until the 26th, the last faculty meeting was actually this past Tuesday, and so there's sort of what was already planned for faculty meetings, and was there capacity or the ability to do that. So again, there's not a plan that is decided upon, but there are questions that principals are going to ask. There's feedback that principals are going to ask. There's conversations that principals are going to have with the staff and with families. So there's also a process for engaging with the results with families via PTO and school councils. And so all of that has begun. So principals will investigate further with staff to get a better understanding of focus areas and how to work to improve. I actually attended the faculty meeting at Lincoln where this started, and there were some really powerful and interesting ideas generated. No decisions made, but the conversations began, and I look forward to attending some others. Likely there will be one scheduled together, so I won't be able to attend all of them. And so it's working to this spring prior to the new school year again to understand these resources and this information and talk about it and make important decisions. It's also that this information is really important. So professional learning. This is actually important in multiple areas. One of the things that we don't ask about professional learning is specificity, and this is a challenge in the survey, because some of us consider faculty meetings professional learning. Some of us consider coordinator-led sessions professional learning. Some of us consider district-wide opportunities out of the Office of Professional Development professional learning. Some of us consider all of those professional learning. It's that definition of professional learning that is not differentiated in this. And so this is another area where the conversations are really important. At one school, so if you remember from earlier, the professional learning at the high school saw a large drop, and the administrators, the dean of faculty, and others felt that they had put together a plan that was responsive to last year's survey data with the creation of faculty learning teams, and felt that they were on the right track, and the survey results showed otherwise, right? There's important conversations to be had. And so it's not that it's not that, there's the reflection of you feel you're on the right track and you get the information, well, then you have to have new conversations and work to either improve. Maybe that was the right pathway, but it wasn't structured or supported, or there wasn't enough opportunity, so it's changing the conditions under which that plan was put forth, or maybe it was the plan itself. And so those are, for example, specifically in that area, specifically for the high school, will be really important conversations, given the energy and the time and really the thought that was put into that. So that is just one example of professional learning. This is a conversation that will be had actually at all schools. What will make professional learning, the principals will be engaged in this conversation with staff at each of our schools, specifically with the focus of how do we make sure that faculty meeting time is of the highest quality. It is also conversations that coordinators will have with folks that they're working with. So continuing, of course, for coordinators to work with their middle school teams and understand how those learning opportunities can be improved. And in science and social studies, we're bringing back the district-wide professional days in science and social studies, and the full plan Ms. Gittens will bring forth to you. And if you want me not to, am I good? So what we're doing is we're going to focus, rather in the past when we had district-wide professional days, it was really watered down where there's a little bit of everything. It was sort of, you went to a professional day and you got a little bit of math and a little bit of language arts and a little bit of science, a little bit of social studies. And the coordinators have worked together to decide where will there be focus areas this year. So K1 and 2 will be social studies, and K1 and 2 will be, I'll get you the information. K1 and 2 will be either science or social studies, really focused in time with either Jeff or Janet, and then 3, 4, and 5 will be the other content. And I think for them, there are really important proactive questions they can ask teams, and I think that there is information at the end of those professional learning sessions. There's immediate feedback we can ask so that we can modify and change course if after a session or two we're finding that it's not learning needs. So all of these next steps are being discussed both with principals and by principals, with coordinators and by coordinators, because the amount of time sort of all in that we focus on professional learning and the amount of resources on professional learning, it's just unacceptable to have professional learning that's not meeting the needs. This also goes to student services. There is a high level and significant amount of professional learning that comes out of student services, and Casey is really focusing on focusing it. So there are more limited but strong opportunities in support of the needs that teachers are identifying. And for our paraprofessionals, currently, really the main and in many instances only source of professional development that paraprofessionals get is through the Office of Student Services. And so that is something that Casey is looking at really closely to make sure that that is both responsive and supportive. And there was a question, or multiple questions.
So my question was, at the end of this session, would we have an evaluation form for everybody who's taken the course with the curriculum coordinators to say, how was this, did this meet your goals or whatever? How could we improve it? Something like that.
Yeah, I've asked that question, and we just haven't looped back. And so that's something that I believe can actually be pretty easily put together.
Just get continuing education credits for this, right?
Yes, and not always, depending on when it's offered. But if you embed it as part of the day, so if you're in a science training for 5 out of the 6 hours, or 4.5 out of the 6 hours, well, then it's 4 hours and 20 minutes, and then there's 10 minutes put forth for really like 5 key questions, and you can do both some scaling, some Likert scale questions, and open response, or if it needs 15 minutes, it's about building in the time for the feedback. Because that's important, so that we can, failure is feedback. So if you get feedback after a session that it didn't meet folks' needs, we want that feedback because we don't want to persist in that. We want to be responsive. So I've asked the question. I am sure that the answer is yes. That we can do this. Yes, the answer is yes. And we will loop back and build those structures, and then support for folks and how they can use that within the time, not asking for sort of outside or at night, but like within the time,
right.
Build it in to the time, and that would be available, whether it was something offered by coordinators or principals or the Office of Professional Development or so forth.
Thank you.
Ms. Scotto.
do we still have in place a robust mentoring program for new teachers?
We still have the same mentoring program that the district has had for a long time. So where teachers new to the district are matched with a mentor, they meet regularly. I will ask Gabe McCormick to put together a full presentation of what we offer. I think that there are some fair questions given the size of the district and given the sort of the number of new teachers, whether or not we want to look to sort of a more whether this system works, or whether we want to look at an alternate system where there are a few full-time mentors that are part of the district. And that obviously is a question for the committee because that's a budget question. It's also a policy, probably a curriculum or a policy subcommittee question. And so I think what I can get for the committee is what currently is happening and what has been happening for many years now, and also at some point in the next couple of months, sort of the ideas of what are some other things that that districts that have done mentoring differently and it has worked really well. What are some of the things that they're doing?
I just had a quick question about, is there a way that educators can suggest areas for professional development within this survey or within like a building-based conversation? Will that be part of it, where they might suggest areas of self-selected areas of growth? Or
Yeah, it's not included into this survey. I would fully expect it would be a part of the conversations, and I will reconvey that to everyone. And so I actually went ahead and sort of talked through with this slide, but you can see the breakdown. So it's both how do we improve at the bottom, the slight value and not at all valuable. We also have a big group in somewhat valuable. And so, with some, relatively, and I'm not saying it's necessarily easy modification, but relative ease, I think we can improve what we're doing so that we both are addressing the lowest, the least satisfied folks with respect to professional development, as well as the folks that are in the middle band. And so I think it's how are we looking at it across the band. The feedback, the feedback is a challenging one, and let me just sort of put forth a couple of the questions that I think you as a school committee, we as a school system, we really need to think about. So a number of educators, all of our paraprofessionals, by structure, receive no formal feedback. And so all of our paraprofessionals who are answering this survey would likely answer that they rarely or never receive feedback. That's a structure that has sort of been, or a system, or structure or system is not a fair characterization. That's a habit that has been in place in Brookline for a long time. And so I think the question is that how we want to continue operating? So that's just sort of a question that is not responsive to this. The second is that we have a lot of people giving feedback, and again, the anonymity of the survey, which we really respect, because we know that when a survey is anonymous, we actually get honest answers because folks are not fearful that they would somehow be identified. The anonymity of the survey, we have a lot of people in every school that are doing evaluations, and so a school the size of Driscoll, where you have probably close to 70 professional staff, Dr. Talukdar is evaluating approximately 20 of the 70. You have Dave Euclid, the vice principal, again evaluating approximately 20 of the 70. You have 30 people evaluated by people who are outside of the building. And so the challenge in this question is it doesn't help us understand the frequency of feedback. Are folks more satisfied with feedback from building-based folks than they are from coordinators and district-wide directors? So those are conversations to have, and it will take time to get that information. But given sort of the pattern of dissatisfaction with feedback, I think that's really important. The other question is sort of changing the idea, what is feedback? So in one school, the school leader stops in and sort of briefly, says hi, might ask a question or two in every class every day. As a part of that, might stay longer and have sort of informal conversation about something. Is that feedback, or is that just hopping in? Is that, sort of not hopping in? That diminishes the importance of the school leader being present and understanding what's in the room. So that was an unfortunate term that I used. I think being present, that's really important. That actually, if you look at that when I looked at that school survey data with the principal, the growth in trust, in belief in the administration, in almost every area was so incredibly high. There was actually lack of progress and feedback in that school. I'm actually okay with where things are because so many positive things happened in that school based on not just being present and visiting, but the connections, the real connections that were being made. And I imagine through conversations, to your earlier question, Ms. Monopoly, as folks, if asked deeper questions, are your suggestions considered? I would imagine, based on the incredible positives in that school, that folks would at a higher rate than in previous years say, yes, our ideas are being considered. So that principal will have a conversation with her staff to say, okay, this is an area of weakness for me, and I want to work on it but not lose all of these other things that we're doing well. Let's have a conversation about how that can work. And so really it's at that school-by-school level where some of those individual conversations are really important. The other thing is how often we give feedback. By collective bargaining agreement and an agreement that took a lot of time to work on, and that I think is important. Permanent PTS teachers don't receive formal feedback very often. It's actually sort of the minimum requirement is twice every 2 years. So if you're getting that formal feedback twice every 2 years, you're going to rate really low that how often do you receive feedback. Now, this question of formal or informal, adding informal was new this year, and I think there's some conversations to be had with PTS folks. Are you receiving more frequent and more useful informal feedback in addition to that once annual formal feedback? So there's some really important questions to ask so that we can better understand how we're giving feedback.
I was just wondering, is there any thought about maybe splitting it into formal and informal, like two different questions? I mean, to sort of flesh out more of that. And I do think that it'd be an interesting interesting conversations about how people feel about feedback, whether they're getting in-school feedback versus with a coordinator who they may see less frequently.
That's a great. Erin said that she's going to look into that. To your question, I think that's a great question.
So the other possibility would be to ask the question: do you want more feedback? Maybe they may not get a lot of feedback, but maybe they're not asking for more feedback.
Fair question.
Then the question is, do we want to, what do you do with that?
So I just want to say a couple of other things. I mentioned earlier work that's already happening sort of in response to this and some other things. I want to go back and highlight my apologies. Let me just. So, communication has been an interesting conversation with principals, and I just want to put forth to the committee that some of our principals have felt that they need to be more restrained, sort of not include their authentic voice in their communications. And the principals who identified that they have been doing that really spoke to the fact that they felt that the lack of their voice has resulted in the family feedback in particular, some lack of clarity about the vision and the path for the school. And I think that in the conversations, folks were really truthful about what they had seen as a fear of sort of using their authentic voice, fear of social media, the potential for, because really everything that we write in this day and age does end up on social media. And it was really important for principals to have the conversation with me, to hear that I believe in them as principals. I believe in what they are doing, and support them in their communication. And I'm willing to help at any time, both Ben and I, if folks want us sort of a second set of eyes on any communication, but certainly want everyone to speak in their most authentic voice, to really put forward with the school community what the vision for the school is and what's exciting about the school, and what are some of these same principals said, but I don't actually talk enough about the really amazing things that are happening, because then I worry about something else. And they were very important conversations for me to have, to say I fully support you and your work and communication, and in some instances changing the way that principals have been communicating. So looking at, we have one principal who spends an inordinate amount of time in a weekly communication, and nobody finds it useful, right? In the family survey and in the faculty survey. So this is not an effective use of time. So stop, and let's revamp it. It's not that you're not going to communicate, but let's really think about how you're going to communicate, how you're going to do it in a way that is conveying what is exciting, because there are so many exciting things happening in that school community. So we have had a lot of really, I have had one-on-one, a lot of really important conversations. And I just wanted to put forth that to the committee, just so that you could hear from me some of the concerns that our principals had shared with me about how they have been communicating and why they maybe were holding back a bit. But also for you to know that I have made very clear that I am 100% behind principals and want them to be communicating in that I've said it a couple of times, that their most authentic voice, because that's why they have been selected. One of the many reasons why they've been selected as our school leader. So I anticipate that we saw in some schools a lot of positive change in communication, and I very much anticipate seeing a lot more. I will say one more thing about communication. As I reflected on my own communication, I find that I spend a lot of time writing every week or 2 weeks for you the superintendent report, and I imagine that not many people read it. Besides, some people read it, but it's not, because it's a link on the website. It's posted a couple days after the meeting. It's not as readily accessible as if I were to use that information and much more frequently send that and other things out as a more frequent newsletter. So you will actually find that tomorrow I will send the second newsletter in 3 weeks, in 2 weeks, second newsletter in 2 weeks. This one has a whole lot of information about the Baffin Awards and the Xi'an Exchange Program and many other things that are happening, and I plan on doing another newsletter before the end of the school year. So there's a lot that I'm already doing and not taking full advantage of, using that for more broad communication. And so I have reflected myself on communication. I'm actually quite excited about that change, as well as the support that principals have identified needing in order to be effective at communication.
So before we started this, the committee was ahead of schedule. We have got you back on schedule. But just to wrap up with a couple of things here. We talked earlier about the district staff survey and district climate, and I think it was Ms. Federspiel asked about, or do you ask those questions to other folks? And we said we do ask the same questions on district climate to school staff and district staff, and wanted to highlight this for you because there's a difference in the responses. So in terms of the district climate category and the questions you see at the bottom there, those are just some of them, samples, which are focusing on opportunity to do your best every day, how helpful are district leaders, how successful district leaders in communicating important information, overall how positive is the working environment. You see a real difference between district staff who answer the question and school staff. Now, I'm not going to come up here and say we know why yet. We don't. Okay, this is new data we're just looking at. But it's interesting to note. And then you see, even in specific questions, you see some differences. On the left, one question, how helpful are district leaders in providing support? You need to do your job well. And overall, how positive is the working environment in the district as a whole? So especially on the right hand, you see a change of a difference of 13% between how school staff answer that question and district staff. You back up a little bit and say that it's of interest that these are different. Neither one is sufficiently positive, really importantly. I don't want to gloss over that, okay? It's very, very important to acknowledge that. The difference is interesting. And I would say perhaps, this is a guess, or this is a supposition. It may be the case where we are concentrating more heavily on supporting and working with and informing and being aware of folks in the schools and not minding those who are closest to us. And that's an omission, a serious omission if that's the case, but it's something for us to look more closely at. That gets to the conversations we're having around communications based on the result of the data you see ahead of you. And we talked about the work with district staff. So a lot of work to do, but just wanted to point out that this is of interest, is that there's some sense that the district is doing better overall among school staff than there is among district staff in terms of climate. So I want to stop there. You were great in asking questions along the way. If there are any to wrap up, we're happy to answer them. And do want to understand we've taken a lot of your time.
I've been talking a lot. If somebody else wants to
Go ahead.
It's interesting. I was quite dismayed when I read this today, but I'm quite happy with your responses to this, because I hear you taking it seriously, and I hear you looking at this and saying, what do we need to make changes? And to me, that's the most important message we can get out of this, is that you believe this is important. You're not trying to explain it away. You're not trying to say, this doesn't exist. You're dealing with it. And I think to you, Superintendent Bott, and you, Mr. Lemus, I'm really appreciative of that. And I know it's hard work, and it won't change in a day.
Right.
But the fact that you realize it will make the whole process move quicker. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Helen just said. I commend you for doing this. I think it's really important to get this information. I would like the students involved in the survey, so I would really push for that. I have to say it's disappointing, the results, now that you're in your second year. I would have thought first year would have been, transition year. Second year we would have been really moving. So I think there are some things to think about, reflect. And I guess I would just hope that maybe we'll come back maybe during our the summer workshop, or take a deeper dive into some of these issues, so we could see how the school committee can be helpful in getting these scores up. Not for the score's sake, but because we want people to feel good about the district, feel good about their schools, feel supported, feel that professional development is bubbling up from the teachers, not just coming top down, and that certainly feedback needs to be important, or we need to rethink that. These are really important topics, and I think we want to have the district humming, and we need to take a deeper dive into some of this. So I hope we can do that now that we've had a chance to look at it, you've had a chance to think about it, and maybe in July we can go deeper, or sometime.
Right. I think that the summer workshop is always a bit of a conundrum, because we block out 6 hours. Is that what? Of solid work, and it's never even remotely enough time to cover the agenda that we set up. It's really remarkable how intense the work is and how fast the time goes. But that a central piece of it is really the department heads individually coming forward and reflecting on how the goals that were set for the closed year were met or not met, and then setting sites looking forward for what they really see the work of their department in the year to come. And I think that's what I'm sure that everybody's going to be trying to put that together in the month between now and the summer workshop, so that they can kind of take this information and incorporate it into their goals for the year, and then that'll set up the conversation, I think, quite well. Ms. Scotto.
I am not attempting to explain the answers away, but I'm attempting to understand them. And one of the things that I think about is when people think about the schools, one of the things on their mind is our inability so far to solve the ninth school problem. And I think that is a cloud over the system at this point in time. And I think that it is upsetting to people, particularly I think the people working in the central office as opposed to the schools, because the schools have kids there, they're doing things, there's a certain amount of just pleasure when you're in a school. But I think that the atmosphere in the community is such that it has an effect on how people view the school system and the school committee and the school staff. And I guess what I'm really thinking is, again, not attempting to explain it away, but thinking, what can we do about this to change that? I mean, one of the things is we can build a ninth school, but even in the process of coming to our answers about it, what can we do to make it less heavy? Because I do think it's having an effect on how people view the schools and the school system. And I think it's something that we do need to address.
If I could speak to that point, I did have a meeting at a school where some of the initial discussions, in particular the struggles and the drop at that school in staff feeling that they had or ability to work with the most challenging kiddos, there were some ideas in terms of staffing that would help, but fundamentally folks came back to the question of, but we just don't have the space. We don't have the space where when a student needs support, they can have the privacy, they can have that focused attention without other people seeing. And so far from trying to say that it's explained in a way, I think at least in this school, that was a very real concern that came up. And since the committee is soon moving into the debate, and that could have been a conversation at any of the schools, I will say that was specifically a conversation at Baker, and the particular challenge that they're having around space. And I share that not just for transparency, that was where I had the conversation, not trying to sway your conversation. But that was actually a in fact conversation that said, even if we had the supports, we think that the space challenges would still make this really hard to do well. So thank you for bringing up that point.
One other thing that I can't help but comment on, the fact that BEEP seems to be in such a different place than most of the rest of the system. I mean, I think they should be congratulated on their ability to, both with staff and with families, really elicit very positive responses. And maybe we can learn from it.
I will say, I think that it's unfair, and I've always been troubled in school systems where the school leader or the district leader sort of pitted schools against schools. but there are some really positive results in our K-8s. And so while overall you saw the overall trends are deeply troubling, there are a lot of positives when you see the specificity of the results. And there are things that went up, there are things that went down. There's some schools where nearly everything went up. So there's some really important information sharing from Vicki and the BEEP team to say what is working, what are you doing well, what are the things around professional learning, et cetera, that are working. And there are things in our K-8s. And so I just want to say that I'm not, I do not want to share and sort of talking about one school versus the other, but there are a lot of good things, both in sort of subsets of questions and in some instances across a lot of questions where things are improving. And that's something, too, that in the individual work, looking with school leaders at what is changing in your school and look at this, so what can you learn from other schools and what are the questions that you can ask. So I just thank you for raising that question and reminding me to share that point with the committee.
Just two quick things to wrap up, and one of them follows directly on this. In the past, we have waited until the fall to post the individual school results. So all the results for individual schools are on the website and have been since last fall and the previous fall. Because we've always wanted to give principals a chance and schools a chance to work with that data on their own before posting it. This year we will post those information towards the end of the school year, giving principals a chance to share it this year. Not all of them will have done that, but do think it makes sense to share that a little earlier than prior years, but we won't. So we'll put it on the district website towards the end of the school year, but not until then, just so you know that.
Will you also share it with us?
Yeah. And then the last thing, which I hope folks get, I really appreciate the comments from Mr. Chalupsky and Ms. Federspiel. Also, I hope that you get that. I hope it was clear that, like we've been saying for a while now, like any data, this data is a beginning point. It's something to look further into, explore more deeply, and learn from. It isn't at the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning, and that's really the way we've approached it. I hope that came across tonight. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lummis and Ms. Cooley. I think that this was really a fascinating presentation, and I think it speaks to the both the quality of your work on this as well as that you seem to be working with a good vendor, a consultant that supports it with all of their structure and questions that are developed through their 500 schools and all of that. It seems to be valuable, and we look forward to hearing more about what you guys are doing with the information and how you're using it to direct improvement in our schools.
I just want to give credits to Panorama is quite good. Vicki Ching and Aaron Cooley are fantastic, and that's really what you're seeing.
Thank you. I heartily accept that endorsement of staff. Okay, so that we actually had a pretty good segue into our discussion, which we have some time to just talk further about the night school alternative site study and any kinds of conversations that we might like to have tonight as a school committee. We are going to be coming together with the select board to sort of deliberate together next Wednesday, and there are a couple of pieces of paper, if you will, that have been distributed. One is the relative comparative cost matrix that was also presented last night and previously for all of the different options that have been developed, just if anybody wants to refer to it. And then also are the kind of detailed criteria and worksheets that were developed by staff, by Dr. Joe Connolly, by Mr. Lummis, and for each of the schemes and each of the criteria, which may be something that we want to look at and talk about tonight, or I would certainly encourage everyone individually now that we have both had sat with the presentation from the team and also heard from the public last night, to go through their own individual kind of analysis and deliberations in advance of our meeting next Wednesday. But with that said, I'd just like to open up the floor to the committee for comments or discussion tonight. Mr. Perlman.
While we certainly heard a lot of division last night, one thing that seemed to be unanimous was a strong desire to begin with expanding capacity and to really get going on something. And along those lines, it appears to me that starting with Driscoll would be a very good idea, because it seems to have a broad base of support. I don't think even one person spoke against that. Now, where perhaps we would have a variation is, I'm not sure that starting with Driscoll should preclude us from looking at a larger solution as well, and a comprehensive one. But I do feel that we need to start with something, because that was a very strong point that we heard yesterday.
I agree with you that we did hear that. However, we only heard it from a couple people, and I'm not sure the Driscoll community has been that aware of the possibility. I don't know, and maybe that's the question.
To that end, I think it would certainly be a good idea to have another listening session at Driscoll, because whatever we do end up doing, I think we want the support of that particular community. So if we mention that it looks like we're going in that direction and give the Driscoll community a chance to speak more focused on that specific proposal, and then see where it leads us.
Well, the other thing that did come up the previous time when we discussed Driscoll, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Good.
Was the issue of play space, and that in order to really make a 4-section school work there were some houses that were situated nearby that may need to be bought, if possible, in order to expand the play space, because the play space would be one of the smallest of all the schools. So that came up as an issue, I remember, the last time. So just to put one thing in there.
I also have a lot of apprehension when it comes to starting with, getting started and the desire to start something and saying, well, Driscoll looks easy, and compared to some of the other options is a lot less expensive. My biggest concern about it is that it's a lot of money, and it only nets us 9 classrooms. And so we know that by the time that this project would come on board, we have the need for, I think it's 17. And so
18.
18. So if we have
374 children would be divided by 21 is approximately.
And so we're bringing on a whole project, similar to what Devotion is coming on board and adding some classroom capacity. But it's not, it's like a tiny little drop in this, the real problem that we have, which is capacity. And so for how many more years, and what do we do with all those kids? So if we started with Driscoll and we build that and we build the 9 classrooms, we still have not met the need that we have in that moment. And where are we going to find those classrooms? And so we can't really talk about Driscoll as the solution for the capacity even in that minute. It's just not the solution. And so that's my biggest apprehension about getting started with Driscoll.
I'm not suggesting that we just expand Driscoll and end it there. I think that we need to have a comprehensive long-term solution. The reason I mentioned Driscoll is because it appears to be the quickest project that we could start. They're the fewest legal hurdles. And I hear exactly what you're saying, and we do need to expand capacity well beyond Driscoll. But given how long this debate has taken, it's been several years, Adding 9 classrooms would be a start, and it's something that we can do right away. And it does not preclude pursuing other options at the same time. I would definitely endorse pursuing multiple options at once. I'm not even convinced that we need to have this as a sequence of Project 1, Project 2, Project 3. Maybe we could have 2 projects at once, depending on the numbers. It's worth considering. But Driscoll is something that we can almost certainly start right away, and that would help alleviate some of the capacity problem. Again, it's not perfect, but if we continue debating for another year, another 2 years, or waiting for Article 97 issues to sort themselves out, then we haven't added any classroom capacity at all. And I don't think there's really patience anymore in the town for that.
I think though the part that gives me the most that concerns me about what you're saying is that it comes with so much assumption that we can't. It comes with a lot of assumption that after we do an $83 million project, that there will be more money available. And so, and I know, especially you were just campaigning, and you heard from a lot of people, especially in your own precinct, who did not support the overrides that have happened and have stated that they would have a lot of hesitation about supporting any additional overrides. So if we were able to get $83 million, and we're needing to be smart and fiscally responsible with our money, and if we only have $83 million or only have $100 million, I don't know that anyone at this table would say, you know what, we should spend it at Driscoll. And so I think it's a false not a false statement from you. I think it's a false statement from many in the community and many that we're hearing from of, well, we should do this because then next we can't. We don't know that next we can. And so if we're going down the path and we're starting with $83 million and then we're done, we have a really, really, really big problem. And that, and I think that that's a reality that we might have to face.
Well, I'm not suggesting, again, that we stop at Driscoll. I would like to see some of these bundled together even at the same time. So, for example, the Pierce K5, 6, 7, 8, that adds 17 classrooms, and that at the low end is estimated at $108 million. Driscoll at the low end, $60 million. So that's a total of $168 million. And regardless as to what the breakdowns might be in one particular precinct, the entire town votes on overrides. The entire town votes on debt exclusions. And even in Precinct 15, debt exclusions pass overwhelmingly. So I really think we leave it up to the voters to decide what they're willing to do. We ultimately need their support anyway. And I would just like to get started and respect what we're hearing, that people really want a solution. I'm very concerned that the current sites under consideration for a 9th school, they're going to be held up, whether we like them or not. Realistically, we're under the specter of litigation. Realistically, it's not so easy to find a land swap, and then we're waiting more and more time when we can get started right away with some of these other schools. If we bundle it together, I agree that it would be a more honest question to put to the town, which is why I don't want to do Driscoll in isolation. I really don't. I would rather package 2 of these at the same time. So if we package both the Pierce K through 5, 6, 7, 8, along with Driscoll, that's adding 26 classrooms. That's basically right what we're trying to add anyway with a 3-section school.
But I mean, I think that does assume basically almost no renovation of the existing Pierce, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is problematic and probably not something that the Pierce community would be willing to support, whether or not it's the right idea. So I think sort of suggesting that that's only 100 and whatever the number is, $60 million. I'm not sure that's going to fly just from in that community.
I agree, and I think we certainly need to figure out what level of renovation we could do right away. Something that I find attractive about the Pierce K through 5, 6, 7, 8 model is that the building is separate, so it's possible we could get MSBA a little later on for the renovation portion of it. So start with the adding classroom capacity, which includes some right sizing, like a second gym and the cafe area, and then as sort of the second phase, get to the renovation. Because all of these sequences we're looking at would be over 10 to 15 years anyway. So I'm thinking we start with the main focus being on add capacity, get those 26 classrooms between Pierce and Driscoll, and then try to partner with MSBA to do a full renovation of Pierce.
Ms. Fetterspiel.
Well, so this is this is going to be a huge dilemma here. I agree. I think Driscoll needs to have 9 added. I still want a 9th school, and I want Pierce renovated. So that's what I want. I really don't want Pierce to be a 6-section school. That's just, again, I'm just telling you what I'm thinking. I think it's too large. It doesn't need to be that large. And so, I don't know how we start negotiating this. So I want Driscoll to have 9 with renovations. I want a 9th school in a place where people can agree it's okay. I think we need that space. But I also want renovations at Pierce, but in my mind it doesn't have to be expansion. And so I get to about, 9 and 27, is that what? So I'm getting closer to 36 classrooms. So that's where I am. So people can start. I'm not sure how we're going to resolve this, but that's kind of where I am. And I wouldn't mind starting with Driscoll, knowing that the 9th school is coming up next, and then the Pierce renovations are coming up as soon after that as we can.
Oh, yes.
I mean, one thing I wonder about in all of this is between the boards and anybody else that's interested, what beyond classrooms is the baseline, and should some time be spent establishing a baseline of what it is that we intend to accomplish comprehensively in terms of renovating facilities, in terms of classrooms, in terms of cost. Maybe not a baseline, but what is stratospheric and out of the question, and what is not. And it's hard to sort of put all this together if we don't have some sort of common sense of where we're trying to go. From my perspective,
I hope everybody's read the 15 pages that I put together a week and a half ago. I hope everybody's read it twice because the amount of information and the play of all the information, there's an immense amount of complexity, and because I've been managing it, and both in my 30 years of professional life doing this work, and also more than a decade addressing school facility needs, and if you go back to the building commission, even longer than that, but just since I served on the school facilities master plan committee starting in 2007, I have all this stuff bouncing around in my head, but not everybody else kind of has it there. I think something that is truthful but maybe frustrating about the memo and the scenarios I put together is that I tried not to be sort of conclusive about any of it. I think a lot of people want to know, what is the need? What is the number of classrooms we need? Like, what is the time frame? And I think it's frustrating maybe because I know too much when I won't give a direct answer to that, because it's really just, well, we know, let's just say sections across 9 grades. We know that from where we are today, we need the equivalent of a 2-section school just for the 374 kids that are coming between now and when we open the soonest project. So there's a future demand for 2 sections, let's just say. And then we say, well, we're vastly overcrowded at Baker and Pierce. Each of them, really the inexpensive way to fix those buildings is to essentially take at least an entire section out of, certainly at Baker, which had a new gym, a new library, new cafeteria, new kindergarten wing relatively recently. I think we can say that if you could downsize it back to the population that was designed for, we'd be talking about very small dollars that we would need to just continue to put into that building, right? As opposed to, we got a price for a Baker 4, which is less than it is today, 3 classrooms less than it is today, of $98 million. So it sounds like a real deal to build that capacity elsewhere. because then we wouldn't have to spend $98 million to make the school smaller than it is. Well, we would if it cost $98 million to build that capacity somewhere else. I certainly believe that at this point, having added 60 classrooms and only made the cafeteria at Heath a little bit bigger, the library at Heath a little bit bigger, we're adding significant library, cafeteria, office, guidance suite. We're really adding all that secondary, whatever we call it, common areas, support spaces. We're adding every bit that we would possibly need at the Coolidge Corner School. Totally right-sizing all of those secondary spaces to go along with the classrooms. At Runkle, we did a significant amount of that addition, but not at the same level. I mean,
Actually, we did. We tried, and then.
Well, but we've added almost 100 more kids since we opened Runkle. I think it's somewhere around 80 or 90 since we reopened it. So, the high end of the demand is beyond our reach, and so. Certainly, so what I would really like to see is to renovate the two schools and right-size the facilities in those schools at whatever size we renovate them at, and pick up at least those 4 sections, the 2 that are coming and the 2 that are overcrowded in Pierce and Baker. And then you can say, we're overcrowded at Runkle, so call that the equivalent of a couple of classrooms plus support spaces, because it really is all the small teaching and learning spaces, and that the gyms are lunchrooms are overcrowded everywhere, so that's somehow a lessening of the number of kids in the building. And that 2 to 3 classroom need is probably the same at Lawrence and at Runkle, and those are the smallest. Lincoln, we rebuilt and reopened Lincoln as a 2-section school. It's now a 3-section school, and we know that a lot of spaces have been chopped up and repurposed to make special education teaching and learning spaces that are necessary because they've been built. Charlie Simmons has built those spaces and converted or cannibalized other spaces to deal with the most pressing needs in those buildings. So it's not just the 2 sections that are coming and the 2 at Pierce and Baker, but it's really some more significant need to sort what's going on in our other buildings, which is why the program for the 9th Elementary School included the 3 ELL classrooms, because we could take a program out of one of the existing schools just to make space and put a program that already has, it's already system-wide. So it already has a fair amount of transportation, and then move that, and the same exact thing, we could pick up those 2 classrooms at Runkle and solve 2 pressing problems, one being that it's shy that space, but also that with the population growth in the RISE program, from a pedagogical standpoint, it really makes sense to not do all of that RISE program in one building. It's a big enough program that it could have 2 centers and support the school communities better. So there's a lot of need, which is why, I'm kind of keep circling back to the same ruse that Ms. Federspiel said, which is, boy, to deal with this, we really need a site for another elementary school. And so we're in the conundrum that Mr. Perlman is pointing us to, which is we haven't ascertained that site. And, but what do we do with that? And frankly, one of the things that I think is useful for us to do with it, and I'm perfectly happy to do myself when we sit with the select board next week, is to say, we've identified a site, we've got some opposition and some broad-based buy-in in the community to the Putterham site. There's pretty significant voices on both sides of that. Neither can be ignored, certainly. But the question of whether the site is ascertainable, whether we could actually proceed with it, we don't have the end. And Mr. Glover has made this point several times in these conversations. Can we move ahead? The one thing we know as a school committee is that we cannot assemble and prosecute a Article 97 relief appeal and walk it all the way through the legislature to the governor's desk. That's just not within this board's purview. But it is within the purview of the select board. And so I think we've got to pressure them and just say, look, if you think you can do this, do it. And if you want to throw up your hands and say, never going to happen, then tell us, and let's not waste any more time pursuing it.
David, so somebody last night said something about 26 months to get the Article 97. Is that true?
There's no fixed time frame for that.
I didn't think so. I mean, it depends on
What
how
I
fast
am
you
not,
move.
I'm certainly not an expert, and other people, there are undoubtedly other experts in town who know the answer to that. But what I have learned, what I've been told at least, is that virtually every session of the legislature has Article 97 relief appeals that are brought to the floor and successfully voted and passed through to the governor's desk, and this happens on a routine basis. There are a number of steps in the process, but I don't think there's a fixed timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Scotto and then Ms. Schreiner-Oldham.
I have grave doubts about the Putterham site. One reason being the fire station, because I think that there's going to be tremendous pushback for that. And the argument that was brought up last night is that that all of the forest, all of the trees serve as a buffer for the neighborhood from that. And I think it's going to be very difficult to get that for the smoke. When I don't know, but anyway, I'm just telling you what was said. I don't know the truth of it, but I think getting that through town meeting is going to be virtually impossible. You've got to get a 2/3 vote in town meeting. You will never get that, I think. The question I have is, there was a lot of talk earlier in this process about the other end of the golf course. And it would also involve Chapter 97. But there was a fair amount of support for that in the Baker community. And I think part of it was eliminated because possibly of the lay of the land, that there was something about... I'm not certain why, but I'm wondering if it is worth going back and looking at that site, because then you get rid of the issues around the fire station, and you also, the traffic, while the traffic there isn't terrific, I think it's an easier traffic issue. There will be easier traffic issues there than at the Putterham site.
I respectfully, I don't think anybody at this table can evaluate different ends or middles of the Putterham Meadows site. I mean, I think that that what we know about it is that there's a lot of water on the site, and whether or not there's actually a viable site on that corner that was a lot of people were very excited about in more than 2 years ago. That was discussed at the Parks and Rec Board meeting in March of 2016, that particular site. Ms. Schreiner-Oldham, and then, go ahead.
I want to respond
Sure.
just to the
This is a
smoke
two-finger,
issue.
like in the advisory.
Right, in an advisory, exactly. Smoke goes many different ways, so it could go towards neighbors on the other side. It doesn't have to go towards, they can't make it blow one way or the other.
I think it's safe.
And I think it just, that whole issue sort of.
But it is an issue.
Well, it's an issue that can be dealt with,
And it's an
is
issue.
what I think.
And it's an issue that, my understanding from what Neil said last night, although the firefighter who spoke said that he was there in an official capacity, I don't think the town thought he was there in an official capacity or asked him to
I
be there.
thought he said he was speaking on behalf of the union.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so then what I think what we all need, a lot of assumptions are being made by the public and at this table about what this is based on someone's comments of his own beliefs, and I think that that's a mistake. But there are questions, very valid questions that need answers, and so I do think that it would make a lot of sense to have the fire chief actually come
Yes,
and talk to us
absolutely.
about this before the boards, because this is going to be, we're not going to be able to get past this to see how it would be addressed, how to solve these questions without having real responses. But I think the danger is that if we don't have real information.
Well, what we did hear from Chair Wyszynski before the public comment started last night was that we are aware of three substantial challenges to the site. There is Article 97, there is traffic, and the DCR, which controls both the West Roxbury Parkway and Horace James Circle, and there's the training facility at Fire Station Number 6. And what Chair Wyszynski said is that we're aware of all of these and working on them. So it's not. I think it's a little soon to say that that the fire station training facility is a deal breaker because it really hasn't been brought into the conversation in a detailed way. I think it's obviously something that is of concern to everybody. Yes, Ms. Monopoly.
I do think that the fire station, the fire training issue is an issue. I think that a lot of people are concerned about it, and we may not have all the information that we need, but that in combination with the Article 97 issues that are going to be a potential delay, as well as the traffic issues, I think that while I am entertain the thoughts of Ninth School, I just don't know that, and maybe this site would come forth as being removing those impediments. I don't see that as it's been talked about as a quick choice, and I just don't see that as being our quickest choice as a first project because of all the delays. I do think that we need to renovate Driscoll and Pierce, and we need capacity. I think we need to come up with a plan. Earlier, I think Julie mentioned we didn't know if there would be any more money after we do Driscoll, but in that case, what if there's not any money after we do a ninth school, and what happens to Driscoll and Pierce? So I think that we need a plan. We need a long-term plan, and we need to make sure we have a plan that meets all of those needs that we already say that we have in a fiscally responsible way, but also that is going to be supported by the community. And we heard a lot of community input yesterday, and people are very divided about that particular location. And I don't think it's necessarily a ninth school issue. I think it's a location issue for that particular place. And so I just think that we have to really, I don't know how we negotiate this, but I just don't see how we can say, yes, we're going to go ahead with Potterham Woods when we have so many things we don't know, and there could be so many delays, and then we're delaying it more and future years. So, I think that looking at property that we already own, like Driscoll or Pierce, and working on a project of whatever size and, capacity that we think is appropriate, I just think that's going to be faster, but I do think that we need to consider what that total package is, and maybe that's a great way to approach the community and say, here's our plan, here's what we think we're going to need to do that, and here's how we're going to address it, and hope that we can get support for that program and an override in a comprehensive program so that people, being really transparent with them, and this is our process, these are our ideas. I just think there are a lot of impediments, a lot of real concerns about that site.
I challenge the reasonable assertion that you make that it's really just that site and that it's not a ninth school issue. The reason that we're having trouble with the Potterham site, that it's not a ninth school issue, it's that it's particular to that site. I challenge that because the School Facilities Master Plan Committee that was convened in December of 2007, and you can read the report. It's on the Ninth School website. It's right there. And reported out in January of 2009, said we really need a ninth school, but it's too hard to find a site. So I think the problem is not that there's something wrong with that site, but that we're stuck with the idea that we really do need a ninth school, and we're having a real problem, as Chair Wyszynski said last night, coming to terms with the compromises that are necessitated by making that choice. And it may be that as a community, we are incapable of making those compromises and picking a site. But I don't know how we get ourselves out of this box if we can't come to terms with that. I mean, because, again, how big are we going to make our schools? You know, if we stay with 8 schools, how big when does it break? When do we no longer do it this way? Yes, Ms. Mobley.
Just so I hear what you're saying. So I guess for me, I have concerns about that site in particular, right? So
we all do.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that we do. So I think, do you think that it's an issue of 9-school period, or the where that it needs to be located near the need, and we haven't found a site? I don't know. I mean, what do you think is the holdup with the idea of a 9-school?
The history of this process is that when it's soft focus and broad focus, multi-site focus, there are lots of possibilities. But again and again and again, when we have moved toward any site in town, the conversation, I mean, largely, it's really easy for people to gravitate into a conversation and to become highly active to fight something off. And so then we get into this space where the people that are opposed to something become highly active and really show up again and again and again because they care more than anybody else. Everybody else is sort of like, yeah, we need a 9th school, but they're not really focused on it. Just do it. But then when we say, okay, how about we do it, and you fill in the blank, every single site. There are many, many, many sites. Stop and Shop, which there was a petition of like 500 people who said, we need a solution that doesn't build on green space. Here's what we're looking for. And Stop and Shop filled the bill perfectly. And then when we said, okay, well, that's one of our 3 sites that we're studying, none of those people came to the microphone. None of those people came to the public meetings. There was virtually no voice for Stop and Shop as a sustainable solution that would be tearing up concrete and asphalt as opposed to trees and green. And the conversation was completely dominated by the fact that we couldn't interrupt purchasing ability of the seniors who have a high need in that district. Even if it closed for 6 months or a year, that was too high. Even if it was just temporary, that was too high a price to pay. It might not open again, ever. And so we couldn't go anywhere near that site because it was a third rail. It was just a very bad idea. And I'm not even speaking to the issues that really kept us from doing that site, which were much more the complexity of it and the cost of it, and the fact that it was multiple parcels owned by different entities, including a multinational corporation we had spoken to and said they didn't really want to do it with us and do a mixed-use building. So it was, but I'm just talking about the community voice and how we don't seem to be able to finalize on any site, because as soon as we talk about one site, all of the negatives of that site are what we as a larger community end up getting stuck on. And that's just the pattern. That's what we've been doing for years and years. So how do we work our way through that, both from a leadership standpoint, because it's up to us, right? I mean, we're the leaders. We're part of it, this group. From a leadership standpoint, and also from a community, which is the same thing, how do we get the community to really understand this and agree that that the trade-offs and that the pluses and minuses and the sacrifices, if you will, are worth it for the whole, for the community? I don't have an answer. Yeah. Well, let's see. Mr. Perlman, and then Mr. Glover, did you have your hand up? Yes, and then Ms. Schreiner-Olden.
I agree with what you're saying about the challenges in front of us, and that whenever a site is identified, a lot of negatives are pointed out. But that is the reality, and that's why I really feel that we can't continue to ignore the Pearson-Driscoll communities while we sort through this. We should sort through it, and it's going to be a difficult process, and that's why I don't want starting with Driscoll or Pierce to be the end of it. It can't be the end of it. I agree with you. But we can start with it, and I don't think that will meet resistance, and that's something we can do right away. And while it's not perfect and it doesn't add the 27 classrooms, it's a start. Doing something would be better than nothing. People don't want to wait. I think we need to listen to the input that we're receiving, especially from the Pierce and Driscoll communities, or at least Pierce has been very clear that they want something done. There's some disagreement about 6th section versus renovation versus adding 1 section, but clearly we could do something there and we could lead with it. And we could do the same with Driscoll. And then present the numbers to the voters and see what they do. I'm optimistic because the debt exclusions pass overwhelmingly, and there is a very high demand for this, and it seems to be a broad cross-section of town that would like to see Pierce and Driscoll receive assistance. We certainly should go back to Pierce and Driscoll for listening sessions and make sure that if we're going to lead with that, they understand the implications and that they still want it, and that would certainly be a worthwhile effort. But my worry is that if we continue to look at different night school options and focus exclusively on that as the lead-in, we're not going to end up doing anything at all, for one. And secondly, Driscoll and Pierce wait even longer.
Mr. Glover.
I do wonder, just for sort of taking a step back, in terms of thinking about the sequence of what we're talking about, discussion next Wednesday, possible vote. If not, then further discussion the following Wednesday and a possible vote. Whether we're ready to make this decision, whether we have enough information to make this decision, and whether we should consider taking a little bit more time, even if that means going into the fall. There's a lot that's been said. There's a lot that hasn't been said and hasn't been talked about. There's a lot of folks who ever referenced the Driscoll community. I was shocked that there was no one, really very few people there. And I think it would be a shock to a lot of people in the Driscoll community to know that we're having this discussion seriously about possibly leading with their site. So I for that reason alone, I think it's worthwhile. I think there's parts of all of the proposals that we haven't talked about. We haven't really, with the Pierce options, we haven't really talked about swing space, how that would actually work, what we would actually do. Is that really feasible? Potterham, we know the challenges there, and we haven't necessarily fully vetted all of those. We've heard very strongly from what seems to be 2 communities, Baker and Pierce. What about the other communities? What about other folks in town? Have we had a substantial opportunity to really get a sense of what they think? Maybe they don't care. Maybe that's why they haven't been here. But should we think about how we do that? What about the other TMMs? We've had folks say that, well, you're never going to get TMM support for X, Y, or Z. Well, do we know that? Have we spent enough time really thinking about that? Should we think about that, or should we just not worry about it? My point is, I just feel like we should be. I know everybody's in a rush, but we should be careful about rushing into a decision next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. If we can't, we're having such a hard time with this right now, and we've been thinking about it for quite a long time. I think that there could be a benefit to waiting a little bit longer. If waiting a little bit longer is completely out of the question, then perhaps we can simply use these next couple of weeks to narrow the choices. We have a pretty broad span here, and then take, if we have 3 finalist options or whatever you want to call it, sequences or however we sort of develop it, take those into the fall, have more robust debate about those particular options. Because what I don't want to be in this situation again where we've selected a site and we spend a lot of time thinking about that site, and then it all goes to what, because there hasn't either been sufficient analysis, there hasn't been sufficient discussion. This is a big decision. It's a 7,500-year decision. I know we want to get capacity now, but we do need to think bigger than that. A little bit more time might not kill us here.
As we're looking at this and considering it as a 100-year decision, I think that something else that we, especially at this table, should spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about is what we want our schools to be and look like. And that, as we think about expand in place, I think that worries me. And the part that, well, one, I think we heard a lot last night from a number of, we heard from a number of parents who were really concerned about the mega schools and just how big the schools are getting, and if we're doing expand in place, how many schools in town, and what does that mean when you have schools that are 6 sections or really big 5 sections, and then you have another, then you have Heath that has 3 sections, and what's that doing to the town, and what's that doing? How we heard a lot about from parents who were saying that that's not equitable, and how do those large schools impact some of our most vulnerable populations? And the other part of these mega schools that concerns me is the lack of play space. And we hear a lot about the need for green space and the need to save the trees, but we hear very little of people talking about the need for our kids to play on green space. And we also hear in these plans like, oh, well, no worries, there's no net loss of trees, there's no net loss of green space. But for some of them, you're putting an entire other school on that same site. And so I heard, my ears went up when the Baker plan was proposed, one of the Baker plans was put up, and they said, no worries, it's no net loss of green space. And you had an entire other school there. And to think about how many students are already on all of our playgrounds. And I don't know for those of you who don't have kids currently in the schools, if you appreciate how crowded the playgrounds are. But, for example, at my daughter's recess, they're not allowed to use the monkey bars during recess because there are too many kids on the playground that it's dangerous. So if you have kids on the monkey bars, they accidentally kick other kids that are on the playground because there are so many kids on the playground at one time. And it's a big comparatively in town, it's a big playground. And so the idea that we would be shoving more kids on all of these spaces, and at Driscoll, there's no additional green space added. And so, I think that as we're thinking about this as a really long-term solution and what's really good for the kids, that's our job to think about. And, a lot of people who are showing up to talk about locations that they don't want to school at, they're thinking about their drive to work or that they might have to sit in traffic for 14 more seconds in the morning. And we really need to be thinking about what's happening when the kids are in the buildings.
Ms. Scott.
I completely agree with Ms. Schreiner-Oldham. I think that the lack of additional play space is it's not going to work. My problem, I'm getting back to the Putterham for a minute, but it's actually what I'm saying is broader than that. The thing that I think that will almost always or probably always stop us from a site, because I think we need to do the ninth school first. But what will stop us is the Chapter 97 piece, because I think that there are enough people in our town meeting who will not vote for it. So what I would suggest is that we begin to think about the sites we have already looked at, think about other possibilities where we would not be taking green space. I mean,
yeah, in social media and in TMM over the last 4 years of this conversation, I can't tell you how many times I've read posts where people say, there are a lot of other options. And then sometimes they say that what is required is simply leadership. And those statements only make me laugh because we've been looking so hard. So everybody's listening. Everybody is all ears on what these sites are where we could actually
I don't think we have a lot of other sites. But perhaps we need to go back and look at Stop and Shop again.
The select board was unanimously against it,
right.
So I would start the conversation there.
Right. They were unanimously against it, and there will be a lot of people against that, but we don't have the Chapter 97 piece. That I think that will make it a little bit easier. I don't know, because I think we are between a rock and a hard place. I'm not suggesting we go out and find 15 other sites, but
unfortunately, with the Stop and Shop place, I think you forget that the cost of that, in addition to the years of Stop and Shop not wanting to do it would be, and Stop and Shop has now purchased
Right.
that land.
But that's true everywhere, Helen.
Correct, but I think it's up to us, as David was saying, to show leadership, to talk with every single, and each of us call all of the town meeting members and talk about the issue and help them to understand the dilemmas that we have, because there is no good solution. We have dilemmas.
Right, we
And-
have dilemmas, but they will say there are many of those town meeting members that you could talk until the middle of next week,
All we need
and
is
it
two-thirds.
wouldn't do you any good. I don't think you'll get it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mr. Glover that we need to understand the more about whether we have a solution to the swap, whether we have a solution to the training center, and whether we have a solution to the traffic. And before we can sort of say, yeah, let's bring this to town meeting. If the site doesn't work, the site doesn't work. But I'm not. But I'm still personally. I'm still hopeful. I've heard a lot of political opposition to it, but none of it is seems any more definitive to me at this point than a lot of what I've heard over many years about all of the sites. I mean, there are opponents to every site, and they marshal every argument, and I think we have to look at them with a very open mind, and we do have to assess the political realities. But Mr. Vitolo yesterday tried to explain that town meeting was already 50% against this by his count, and I do not buy his analysis that he's got it all figured out. Right? I mean, we don't even have the story yet on that site. Mr. Perlman.
I agree with Ms. Scotto in the sense that when we're looking at sites for potential ninth schools, it doesn't make much sense to continue to pick sites that have the most legal impediments. I agree that no matter what we pick, there's probably going to be legal action. There'll be unhappy neighbors. It'll be difficult. But Article 97 does add yet another impediment, wetlands issues that we have in that part of town, add an additional impediment. Some of these other sites that Ms. Scotto was mentioning and some of the others that were considered earlier on did not have that as long a list of obstacles.
I didn't hear her mention any sites, and I'm not hearing you mention any
Well,
sites.
she mentioned Stop and Shop specifically.
Okay, you're right. She mentioned one.
And then also Nancy Daly mentioned Old Lincoln. So there are other sites that have been mentioned as possibilities.
Right. No, but school committee and the entire community need to understand that we will have a two-section school at Old Lincoln pretty soon, and that's where we'll be. With all the people who don't want a school there, all of the T-shirts that came out in B-Space and said that, it was a throwback to we closed it up and left it and because it wasn't the right place for a school and opened a new school and everything. And with all of that opposition, if we cannot lead this community into a viable solution for this, the children are coming. 400 more children are coming, and I thoroughly support our staff's enrollment report and the hard work that they've done with it, with the demographers and everything, but I believe it as a 5-year projection, but I have no confidence that the next 5 years is going to be level beyond that. And so, if people think that we should just give up on this and essentially say, because the economic arguments have been made for having Old Lincoln for swing space. We spent more than $5 million just for Lower Coolidge Corner School swing space. No, the 7 included the busing for Upper Devo and some other stuff. I think it was maybe $5.5 million all in 6. But at any rate, it was $5 million, just 5.5, just for half of the swing space of what we would need for Pierce, right? And so, and we did police station and town hall and everything. So there's the argument. It's not specious that Old Lincoln as an empty building has a huge economic value for the town. But it's not going to be there for that value if we can't build the capacity we need with new, incredible, 21st century teaching and learning. I mean, the two things that are, I think, the primary takeaways from my having walked through the Coolidge Corner School the other day is that it's incredible and that it's huge, right? Both of those things are my takeaways. It's incredible, this facility that we have, and I want to be able to provide that kind of physical plant for our teachers and our students and our families all across town. It's incredible. But it is also, it's the size of a big high school. It's an enormous building. It stretches out in every direction, and I think it's planned for excellence. I think it's going to be great for the kids. It's not that we can't solve those problems, but it is really big. And I don't think that's not what we get at Old Lincoln. And, again, we could, I don't know. I think that's not the vision that we should be fighting for. But I do think that is the end point that we will find ourselves at quite easily if we can't solve this problem. Ms. Charles.
Yeah, I think that some people may not remember when we didn't sell the old Lincoln and said that we needed to keep it for swing space. The town was quite upset at the time, and since then they've learned the value of it. It is not a space where I would want to put a school. I mean, I think Brookline, you don't want your playground across a huge highway. It's just not the space to put it, It has no playgrounds, basically, adjacent to it. We're looking to build something that we're going to be proud of, that we're going to say, yeah, this is great. This is what Brookline deserves. Even, and at Pierce, it drives, I have to say this, to put more kids there is, in my opinion, a craziness, because there is no space there. There is no open space there. It just does not make sense. And then to have more teachers there because you have more kids, where are we going to put the cars? Where are we going to put it? Teachers can't afford to live here or along the Green Line.
So with everybody's consent, I'm going to kind of call this for the moment, pick it up next week, and I will certainly convey to Chair Wyszynski our desire for any and all information that we can get about whether what's going on with clarifying the pathway towards the Putterham site or the Baldwin site or the Pine Manor site, which are the night school sites we have on the table, and whether there's any kind of encouragement that those are things that could move forward. And certainly the notion that not everybody on school committee is convinced that we're ready to take a vote in the short term. And, it's going to be, there's 19 of us in that discussion, so it's a Wild West show, and, but it should be really fascinating next Wednesday. So is that all right? We're good for the moment? Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump to the update on efforts to solicit feedback on proposed policies, and then come back to the FY 2019 budget update after that. Superintendent Bott.
So Deputy Superintendent Noe Miller is going to come up to speak about the work that's being done around the discipline policy, as she is very sort of masterfully holding and moving that work forward. While she's coming up, I'll say very quickly that the proposed home instruction policy has been posted for some time. In the typical way, if you remember, we were much more proactive in soliciting feedback on the discipline policy. We will be sending out tomorrow an email, a very brief email district-wide, to let families and our staff know that the homeschool policy is posted, and then direct people to how to submit comments via that link on the website. So that'll go out tomorrow, so that before the policy comes to you for a first read, we'll have hopefully more feedback on homeschool. And with that, I'll turn over policy updates to Ms. No Miller, specifically around the discipline policy.
Thanks. So we had the policy subcommittee meeting this week, as the superintendent mentioned, and much of what we discussed was just process and timeline, because the committee, and I fully support, made the decision to sort of slow it down, especially given the feedback that we were getting, which was super helpful. In terms of process and timeline, what the subcommittee and I discussed was next steps. Superintendent and I will revise the policy based on all of the feedback that we received. In conjunction, we will begin to talk about what training and implementation will look like, which will then better inform a timeline so that come fall, hopefully at the first school committee meeting, there will be a next draft of the policy. In terms of how we will solicit feedback, the superintendent and I will think through what groups of stakeholders we would like to hear from.
Yes, Ms. Satterthwaite.
I may have asked this before, but was there any way for students, particularly the high school and maybe middle school, to have some input into the policy?
Yeah, not to my knowledge in this last round, but that is something that should be considered.
Yeah, I'm thinking especially with, restorative justice and those kind of practices where the students themselves are involved in that. It might be helpful to get some feedback from them.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think, and Ms. No Miller and I will discuss this, there are many parts of that policy that are straight from Mass General Law. And so I think that when we'll discuss how to get student feedback, because it's, as Ms. No Miller said, it's a great question and should be done. We'll also look at and bring back to the policy subcommittee ideas if we think that we should sort of share the full policy with students, but say these sections, highlight them, say that they are directly from MGL, so that we can differentiate where we're getting feedback. So we'll think through that sort of level of detail, and I think probably makes sense to bring that back to policy.
Okay. Thank you. And then we'll do the votes. Yep. Great. Deputy Superintendent Dunn, would you like to update us on the FY 2019 budget?
So I'm not really quite sure what that entails, other than there are still some items we need to do. You'll be, the Finance Subcommittee at their next meeting will be discussing.
Which is next Wednesday morning?
Wednesday morning on the 13th. We'll be meeting our budget analyst, Jeremy Stull, who just started reviewing sort of what the outline will be for special revenue funds, revolving funds, and what those budget pages will look like for 19 and for 20. Reviewing a proposal from Vicki Milstein on tuition for preschool, and reviewing the lunch price increase with Matt Gillis for next year.
And we have a hearing on the lunch pricing scheduled for Tuesday the 19th, right?
Yes, I believe that's on the draft document.
And so the memo is...
You'll be getting that out tomorrow. It should be coming out tomorrow to the school committee, so you have a chance to read through it, and some finance committee discussion on that on Wednesday before the 19th.
So is the memo finalized and going out to the public, or is it going to finance committee to be?
Finance subcommittee, and then it'll go out to the public.
Great. So
it's complete.
Great. So we know that there's these big swings in cost and the issues around chocolate milk and optional items on the a la carte and all of that. So for those school committee members who aren't on the finance subcommittee, read it when it comes out tomorrow. Send your input to Ms. Ditkoff, who's chair of the finance subcommittee, probably to Deputy Superintendent Dunn is the right way to do that. And of course, welcome to attend the meeting on Wednesday morning as well.
And we will attempt, if you're not at the meeting, we'll be following up with school committee for revisions to that, any revisions to that memo at that meeting.
Yes, Ms. Monopoly.
I just wanted to make sure I got the timeline right so I can make sure that I get it. So tomorrow, the memo will come out for school committee to review, and it'll go to the finance subcommittee, who will discuss it. And if there are any revisions to that, then they'll bring it. Will we talk about it at the next school committee meeting, or just
the next school committee meeting is the public hearing, so it really needs to get out on Wednesday, the 13th.
Okay, so that was my next question was, I was like, well, we have a school committee meeting that day, so the public hearing will be part of the school committee on the 19th,
19th.
right?
It's
Okay,
on the
I
docket
just wanted
on the
to make sure I understood it correctly.
And so on the 19th, we would be planning a presentation by Matt Gillis, and probably representatives from Whitson's would be doing a presentation before the public hearing, in addition to the memo going out, and then I would imagine we would then have the public hearing so that the information is all complete and we have everybody here that needs to be here.
And have we already sent out an announcement about the public hearing portion
No,
of
'cause
that?
I just saw the agenda today to see that it was on the draft docket, so that's something that we can do. I just need to have confirmed that that's actually on the agenda.
Do you know how will we be doing that? Sending out the
So
information?
normally we would
typically?
send it out through
Blackboard?
our, be working with Ben Lummis and sending it out through our Blackboard communication, so every family, every household will get notice about it. So we would do that when the memo was finalized.
Do we encourage, just curious,
Excuse me, Ms. Coyne, the docket's been posted for the 19th, is that right, or not yet? Not yet.
I was just wondering if we encourage, just thinking and getting more families' input before we do this. I was just thinking about whether or not we could or is it appropriate to ask school councils and PTOs to, promote that information as well through multiple sources besides Blackboard?
I'm sorry I was out of the room, but just in terms of that question, on a pretty regular basis, we actually reach out to the PTOs and ask them to communicate messages, whether that's surveys, whether it's tonight, so we can do that on this as well.
Following up on Ms. Monopoly's question, are we anticipating that finance is going to refine a recommendation on each of on what the price is? Is that the ask of finance or as opposed to sort of lay out the a la carte menu of we could this piece and that piece, which is a little more confusing for the public?
I've not had a conversation with the chair of the finance subcommittee, so I don't know if that's if that is something that is going to come out. As you heard at the last meeting, there was some conflict in terms of how one might leave the meeting, whether there was.
We all want to stick with the wellness committee's recommendation, but not have a 75-cent. It's like the 9th school site. We want to have our cake and eat it too. We don't want the negatives, but we want.
I want my chocolate milk.
And we can't serve cake in food service, so that's.
Yeah, right. So we're never going to get that.
On our chocolate milk and
right
too. So the other piece in terms of open items for 19 is, in addition to the agenda item that's here, is also a non-aligned salary structure memo that needs to come before the committee. So we have our non-aligned employees with salary ranges voted by school committee and non-aligned stipends that we have voted by school committee and pay rates for those positions beginning July 1st. And that's pretty much where we are with FY19. And
I'm sorry, were you just, did you just bring us to item 4D?
I just alerted you that there would be another non-aligned agenda item on a future school committee meeting,
I see.
hopefully the 19th, for all of our non-aligned employees
Right.
that aren't included in what's on the agenda item tonight.
Thank you. So do you want to take us through these two actions under 4C and 4D?
Yeah, so this is an excerpt, this page that you have in front of you for, let me just do the extended school year pay rates first, just because I was just talking about that. Item 4D, it starts with BHS summer school at the top, current, and then proposed. It's the sort of the first line across the top. There has been a sort of a long-standing kind of practice in where a lot of non-aligned rates were not coming in front of school committee for action and approval. So as part of the complete non-aligned memo was to do alignment of rates and positions that we are paying for, budgeting for, so what you have in front of you are sort of the most urgent rates, where these are impacting our summer programs, which is all non-aligned work. And you'll see there's some have significant increases, some have no increases, and the reason for that is because teachers in the high school summer school program and teachers in the teachers and nurses, teachers in the summer elementary programs virtually are sort of have the same duties and responsibilities, but you can see there was a significant pay range that was not between the programs. And essentially the pay rates were not, were basically being developed or established based on money that they were projecting to be available. So as opposed to sort of aligning on duties and responsibilities and job descriptions, how we usually design and determine pay rates, it was about money being available. So we're moving the high school, summer school teachers from $29.58 to 42 hours, $42 an hour, and generally they have 4 hours of teaching and 1 hour of prep for course. The calculus project teachers are $47 an hour. There's no change for them. The Bell project, they had 32 to 42. That is an increase based on having a standard rate. And then the other teachers that had a rate change were the early childhood summer, the elementary summer school. And we kept the rates for the ASY special ed teachers and teachers in those programs the same. And the idea is that for next year, for FY20, we would still maintain a cap on we'd basically try to flatten these out. So calculus project teachers would probably still stay at 47, but the other teachers that are 42, we'd probably do a COLA increase and apply a COLA in future years so that we would have, those eventually would catch up to the calculus project teacher. There is, we discussed and had a number of different discussions about the differences of a special ed teacher in the summer program, ESY programs, versus a teacher that's teaching history or a high school course, generally an academic course, or an elementary teacher teaching an elementary academic course, and sort of what were the differences between those two, and felt that there is and should be a differential between a special ed teacher in the summer program for the intensive work that they're doing with students versus some of the sort of general course offerings that are provided. And we also added the stipends for that were for Project Discovery, Achieve, and Explore that had not come in front of the school committee, and there's no change in those. The aid hours rates are based off of we try to base those off of competitive rates, with the para contract. And you'll notice there's a student aid at the high school, and we are adjusting that to the living wage, and that because that's what has been paid there. I don't believe they are exempt from their positions and what they're doing are exempt from the Brookline's living wage rate. What else can I tell you we're changing?
Can we have some? Oh, sorry. Can we have some questions? Maybe you covered this in your remarks, and I just didn't catch it. So a couple of the changes, for example, BHS summer school teachers, the Bell project teachers rate, the PSB non-professional staff license and teaching related services for the summer programs. Those are fairly substantial in terms of the increases. Can you either restate or?
So actually, we looked at, in terms of establishing that $42, we looked at our peer communities. Lisa's been doing a lot of, has been participating pretty actively with an area HR group of area HR directors, and so this has been a topic for, like, pay rates are a topic for HR people all the time. So she was able to obtain from some other communities, what are your summer pay rates, and are they comparable, and pretty much found that we were not. And so everybody kind of defaults on, we're paying our own staff. Well, that doesn't mean we shouldn't pay our own staff competitively either. We should pay them competitively. We shouldn't just assume that just because they're our staff that we can keep these rates. And particularly since nobody had really looked at these rates for a really long time, they just were vestiges of history and legacy. So and the whole memo of the non-aligned memo is based on a whole salary comparison that she did with those area communities to compare our pay rates with their pay rates. So that's also part of why we kept the special ed teacher rate flat, because they're actually on the high side to area communities, as is the calculus project. But the $29 and $32 and $35 is pretty low compared to area districts and what they're doing.
Mr. Perlman.
I noticed that under the paraprofessionals, it says para salary schedule or current rate. Could you elaborate on that, maybe with some numbers?
So we hire a variety of paraprofessionals. Either they're paraprofessionals in other districts or they're our own. So if they're currently employees of ours, we continue them at their contractual rate. We don't change their rate to pay them less because it's summer work, or to pay them more because it's summer work. It's generally the same work. If we have somebody who we hire from Newton or from Boston, we put them on that paraprofessional schedule somewhere, so that they're being paid comparable to our Brookline employees that are continuing to work with us for the summer.
Just for my own clarification, so a Newton paraprofessional will be paid at the Newton rate or at whatever the Brookline rate is?
Brookline rate.
Okay, and what would that rate be?
So those rates range from, it depends on the position they're in.
So it just depends on I see.
To $25 an hour.
Thank you.
I just had one question too. I think it's great. I think it's great to be increasing the pay rates for the teachers, and especially when they're coming in on their summers and working really hard on these programs. I don't have a sense of how large the program is, and this isn't something that we saw in any of the override discussions or in the budgets that we saw leading up to the override. Do we have the funding to pay for this?
So all of the rates were discussed with the program leaders when they were designing their budgets in the spring. Part of why Jeremy Stull is starting with special revenue funds, grants, and revolving funds is because that is absent, and has been the detail of all of these funds and revolving funds and grants has been absent from the school department's budget for a long time. You've been getting a summary line item of about 4 or 5 lines that give you numbers, but doesn't give you what the program is, how many students attend, how many teachers, what's the cycle, what does it do, what's its goal, none of that context. Like we have those narratives for our department budgets is anywhere. And so that is being developed over the summer, and those will be launched first, probably in September. You'll start seeing those at the Finance Subcommittee meeting next Wednesday. We're going to show you the template to make sure that it covers the questions and information that you want to see the school committee, that template covers, like the basics, so that as those get completed and filled, and as Jeremy goes through and sits with each program for budget for this summer, we can start establishing sort of what the context is. And as we go through the budget and the budget approval, the fees will be approved as part of the budget, because you have not approved any of the fees that are charged technically either. And so this is a sort of a large cleanup to be able to do, so that we have full disclosure and transparency about all of our programs we're running, and what is the cost of all of them, what's the cost to parents, how many are supported by grants, all of that. So lots of detail to come.
I'll add specific to your question. I mean, thank you, Ms. Dunn. It was great information, and this was all planned for in the budget. And I think it's important. So that's answer your original question. And what's important to note is not all of this is on the town's operating budget. ESY, for example, is funded through IDEA, which is sort of another reason why it's so important to follow the federal trends around IDEA, because that's a multi-million-dollar grant that funds a lot of our school year staffing as well as our summer program.
So many of these are funded through fees, and so they've been planning.
I have a question and a request. My question is, what is the Bell Project?
I don't know what the Bell Project is. And Andrew, do you know, Andrew?
I don't remember offhand, and I will get that information.
Is it possibly ELL? Brookline ELL?
I believe so, but I want to confirm that for you.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then the request is, we should be voting this in January, not now. People should know what they're going to be making in the summer. So I would request that we make sure to do this early on.
I would like this to be 3 years, and the non-aligned coincide with, as we negotiate our collective bargaining agreements, we then set our non-aligned rates for the next same 3 years. So it's then also done.
All right. At least by January.
That'd be great.
I just will point out that this is a part of, for those of you who remember, has been a part of the non-aligned memo that Ms. Dunn has worked several times to bring to the committee, and haven't quite made it through yet. So I agree that this is important to have, not just in January, but for 3 years. And it is part of that. We took it out of that broader because it's the full memo, because we need to get this passed.
Of course, and I will move it.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Glover, thank you so much. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor? I see that is unanimous. Thank you very much. You have another action that you want to present to us.
Yes. So this memo also should be incorporated into the budget document for FY20, and not be separated, as well as because it would fall under the tuition revolving fund, which includes the materials fee, tuition rates, plus any students we have here under the SEVIS program. So we set a tuition rate annually. So the way that we have students who apply to be a one-year exchange student at the high school, generally 11th or 12th grade. And as part of that program, they pay the district tuition. The memo for you provides, and also provides for students, is what the tuition rate is for the year, and then starting at co-curricular and down are other expenses that they could anticipate at being a student. So it would be, $3,000 roughly for field trips, co-curricular fees, activities, things like that. That's almost $2,000 for tutoring services if they need to or may need them. Those would not all tutoring services we would provide. School lunch, school breakfast, that would certainly change if the price increase changed, and then give them a total sense of what the total education expenses would be. So the tuition is based on the last DESE per pupil, which is 2017, and I increase it 5%. So the differential between the DESE per pupil and what we're charging is 5% because it's a 2-year-old rate per pupil amount. So I do 2.5 for each year, so that we're covering our costs and any projected anticipating costs we have for FY19. So this memo and contents would be incorporated in the budget document, would become part of a sort of fee sheet where the school committee would vote all of the fees and revote fees annually as part of the budget process. And that fee sheet would include things like athletics, preschool tuition, this fee, materials fee, and a general statement about how field trip and other curriculum-related trip fees are calculated. So it would be like, it's just a formula in terms of expectation around how fees would be calculated if there isn't a fee established, because you don't know what the New England Aquarium is going to cost next year, but you know you're going.
So do we charge we used to charge a processing fee for the F1 visa. Do we do that?
I don't believe I think the families pay. I don't believe we have a processing fee.
Because there's a
families
part
have
that
one.
we have to do with it, and that takes some time.
We're only dealing with 1 to 5 or 5 students, so I'm not sure that we have a I'm not aware of a processing fee. I will look, though.
Yeah, I think we should look into it because
added.
It takes staff time to do these things, and I think we should, do that.
Mr. Perlman and then Ms. Scotto.
Under tutoring services, there's a note saying pending assessment results. Which assessments or assessment?
It could be any type of assessment. It could be a language-based assessment. It could be an academic. It could be any type of assessment. It could be self-choice. They are making their own assessment that they want. Tutoring services that it's a guidance. It's not. We are not directing. We're not. We may suggest, but we're not necessarily directing or requiring it. They're exchange students, so they're here on exchange versus here to graduate and have a diploma. None of them are getting a diploma from Brookline High School.
It would typically play out as Ms. Dunn described. If a student came in as an 11th grader and there was some gap in the sequence of mathematics from their home school in Brookline High, and so there may be an assessment where to sort of help through that gap, of the sequence of courses to support the student through it, or if a student wanted to improve English language proficiencies, that type of program. And again, as Ms. Dunn said, is by choice. It's just sort of this is an estimate of what that could cost.
So if we find in a situation where the district is required to provide services, we're going to provide services. So it's not. I just want to assure you that if it's something the district is obligated to do, we will do that. We won't necessarily charge them a fee. If it's something that is optional to them, they would pay that cost.
I have 2 questions. One is a clarifying question, and that is, these are students who are coming not with their families and living here a year, but are coming as exchange students and staying with someone here. If they're coming with their families and they're here from 11 grades, they're here for their 12th grade year, and they're here with their families residing in Brookline, then they would get a Brookline diploma, would they not?
So if they are residing here and they're residing with their families and the family unit, they are residents of Brookline, they have moved here, they are a Brookline student.
So they don't pay tuition.
not pay,
So they
apply.
don't pay tuition either, so they
If
can.
you come in as a
right.
senior and you meet graduation
Mission
requirements, you get a
You do
Brooklyn
it.
High diploma.
So there's a this is where you're specifically coming in under the CVIS program, visa under the CVIS auspices, that you're here as an exchange student for a year. Yes, you might be living here, but your visa to be here is under this specific
Right.
program.
And what countries are these students usually from? Are they from
They've been all over. They've been all over. Name one. We probably have one. Have had one. And generally, it's one. It's only a handful of students per year. It's not a large number of students each year.
Do we have a motion? Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Perlman, thank you so much. So we are being asked to approve this the tuition rate sheet as presented on the motion. All in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you so much, Ms. Dunn. I have two motions. The first is I move that we appoint Ms. Charlupski as the EDCO collaborative to the EDCO representative to the EDCO Collaborative Board of Directors for the upcoming year. And I make that motion, and then I just will preview for all of you that following that discussion, I will also make a motion that we appoint Superintendent Andrew Bott to be our representative to the EDCO Collaborative Advisory Council for the upcoming years. Ms. Charlupski, would you just briefly tell us a little bit about these two roles?
Absolutely. So Brookline was one of the founding members of EDCO, which is the Education Collaborative. It used to be the Education Collaborative of Greater Boston. Boston used to be part of it many years ago. There are 16 member districts, most of them west of Brookline, including Newton, Lexington, Concord, Carlisle, Lincoln, Sudbury, etc. Those western districts. With the reform in the collaborative laws, we used to have two voting members on the EDCO Board of Directors. There was an advisory council and the Board of Directors, and both used to be voting members. With the new law, they only allowed one voting member. And generally speaking, it's usually the superintendent and a school committee member who are the two members of the and not generally, it is the superintendent. But it could be either one of us that could be the voting member. The problem is that we need to have one of us who can go all the time to vote, because if not, there's not a quorum and they can't do business. So
we're I nominated you as the voting member so that they could have, EDCO could have a quorum, and the superintendent could go when he was available to participate and attend to business in the district when he needs to be here. All right. So, any questions? Any thoughts? Okay. So on the first motion to appoint Ms. Charlupski, is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Monopoly. All in favor? Thank you. You do. And on the second motion to have Superintendent Bott Advisory Council, I will accept a second from Ms. Federspiel. All in favor? Thank you so much. All right. We are on to the superintendent's report.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Lummis at the end of the report to come up to actually give you a brief update on where our district work is with safety and security, the process of evaluating safety and security. But before I do that, I want to share a few highlights. Biggest highlight being that on Sunday was the BHS graduation with almost 500 students graduating. It was a beautiful day. I think before that, it's important to highlight the scholarship breakfast, where just thousands upon thousands of dollars generously donated over the years by graduates of BHS, residents of Brookline, folks who are no longer residents of Brookline but went to Brookline schools. Just a remarkable celebration of students, of community, and a great way to kick off the day for graduation. And then, of course, graduation, the symbolism of it is so fantastic. As freshmen, kids meet on Cypress Field and actually go through a gauntlet of faculty cheering very enthusiastically, maybe throwing off the ninth graders a little bit, walking into the quad, sort of what is happening. And very quickly, the freshmen understand that it's the faculty coming around to support and celebrate kids. And at graduation, the faculty lead the students back out of the quad onto the field, and before kids sit in their seats, actually form a gauntlet style where the faculty actually line the pathway and applaud the students as they file past and into their seats. So really, really amazing. We had wonderful speakers, our student speakers, as well as the graduation speaker is Chris Dempsey, Brookline's own Chris Dempsey, town meeting member and transportation board chair, as well as many other things that he does throughout Massachusetts and really fighting for transportation and fair and good transportation for the future. So a wonderful day. Headmaster Meyer's speech was actually a poem, 18 done but not yet done, not done yet. I'll see if he will release a copy that I can share with the committee. I'm not quite there yet.
There is a video of it.
Perfect.
That was on Facebook.
Okay.
And I think it was the tab that put it
Okay.
there. But if you can't find,
I'll go to the tab.
you can check my Facebook page.
All right. So really just a wonderful celebration, and thanks go out to the countless number of people who plan the graduation and ensure that it is truly the celebration of our graduates and the celebration for families. Yesterday, it says Tuesday, it was yesterday, I was able to spend the afternoon at Upper Coolidge Corner School for a Mission Possible, which is project-based learning culminating exercise that was Shark Tank style, where 8th grade students worked in teams to research planets, and they had to actually, in learning about the planet, understand and then propose what it would take to colonize that planet. And they had to come up with a plan, a relatively feasible plan that accounts for the characteristics of that planet, a finance plan. It was interesting that the group, and a communications plan, the group that presented Neptune, when asked about their communication plan, they said, well, it's so far away you won't want to communicate with anyone, so we didn't design one, which I thought was actually a very real response. And in this, students had to create both a path there, suitable habitat for human life, what would be required for human life, and it was fascinating. I mean, the depth of knowledge about the different planets of the solar system and the natural resources on those planets or their moons, and how those natural resources could potentially interact to support colonization and human life was from start to finish was fascinating. We partially funded the Shark Tank panel, partially funded the $150 billion plan to travel to Uranus, and we fully funded the $3 billion plan, which seemed a little low, to colonize Saturn. Yeah, exactly. But it was fast. It was an amazing project, and I did not say that this was Miss Jorge's 8th grade class, and I really want to shout out and thank Miss Jorge for the work and leadership in putting together this remarkable, incredibly in-depth learning opportunity, project-based learning opportunity for her 8th graders. Today I was at Upper CCS for the celebration of Brookline's Police Chief for a Day. Last year, a essay contest was begun by the police department where students were asked to answer a question, and the winning essay the students selected for to become police chief for a day. This year's topic was, how would you resolve a bullying issue at your school? And the winner was Emily Snyder, a 5th grader in Miss Barron's class, 5th grade class at Upper CCS. What was wonderful about the day is that Emily got a police uniform issued by the police department. She was sworn in by Town Clerk Pat Ward, who traveled to Upper CCS, along with 6 members of the police department, including the chief, for a grand ceremony. And then she traveled the town, went on patrol, broke up a fight, I am told, at Emerson Park. She led roll call for the department in the morning and sat in the chief's chair. And then it was culminated with the celebration at 12:30 that the police department had with a lunch for her, some of her friends who came over from Upper CCS, and her family, her parents and grandparents.
Pull out all the stops.
So it is an incredible essay contest, really well worth the effort, and we are going to work to make sure that we get even more submissions next year. Tuesday night was the annual Steps to Success recognition ceremony at the Brookline Teen Center, and Mr. Pollack and I were able to attend. It's an event that celebrates everything amazing about Steps to Success. There were a number of honorees, including Lisa Brown, who worked for many years as a paraprofessional in the PSB and now works through the Brookline Housing Authority, providing direct academic support to students. The Parent Award went to Misty Janes, who I think we all know well. Our elementary student awards went to Enrique Rodas, Jaden Mazzara, Julissa Burgos, and Elizabeth Jamie Lopez. The high school student awards went to Bianca Yurnett, Marley Brown, and Lily Saki. And the college student awards went to Yenti Spachia and Masood Karis. And I want to highlight that Masood just graduated from college and has already established a fund for Steps to Success for graduating seniors who are going to college and need support to purchase a computer and books. And he funded it for 1 year based on the job that he has started upon his graduation, and he hopes to be able to fund it every year. So well worth highlighting.
I thought I heard him say even more than that. Not only does he hope to fund it every year, he
wants to expand it.
He said that his goal was to build up Masood's scholarship fund so that it could provide every STEPS graduate with that support. It was quite an amazing speech.
I actually left off a bunch of schools since last Thursday. I've been to Baker School twice. I've been to Lincoln School twice. I've been to the high school and to Upper CCS twice. So again, really on track with spending as much time as possible in schools. And then lastly, I want to share with the committee that we have received notification for 2 grants. These are continuations of grants that we've had in the past, but as these are always at risk of being eliminated by the state, I just want to highlight that we have received our Inclusive Preschool Learning Environments Grant, which it funds direct services that support preschool learning environments for children with and without disabilities and high-quality inclusive education. Our own BEAT program applied for and received $67,168 for FY19 to fund the salaries of 4 part-time paraprofessional staff and assistant teachers in 4 of our fully inclusive classrooms. And the Coordinated Family and Community Grant, the CFCE grant, is a total of $125,850. And this provides families with access to referral to locally available comprehensive services that support and strengthen families, services that promote child development, optimal child development, bolster school readiness, with the goal of assuring that every child enters school with prior learning opportunities. Specifically for us, what that funds is a project coordinator, 2 community resource outreach coordinators who facilitate 2 weekly parent-child community playgroups that are held in the Brookline Housing Authority buildings, and the Brookline Parent-Child Home Program, which facilitates early literacy visits for 20 high-risk students throughout the year. Throughout the year, this grant supports community activities such as story walks, Saturday STEM playgroups, and educational parent meetings, all at no cost. So really excited. I was a little bit worried about the future of the CFCE grant as sort of budget deliberations happen, so I'm glad that the state is continuing to fund it, to be sure, and glad that BEAP is continuing to receive the resources that are so important to that early childhood outreach and community support. And with that, I'll ask Mr. Lummis to finish the superintendent report with just a brief overview of what's been happening. This isn't a full report. Obviously, since it's not docketed, we will get that docketed, but it's an update for you on work that's been happening.
Thank you. So as we said when we began the review of our emergency response and procedures, we're giving you updates. So this is the latest update. Just quickly, so we finalized the scope of services with Preparedness LLC, the consultant, expert consultants helping us with this. These are the 6 areas we told you about. So back to it. Erin, Don, and I are working on this together, working with Preparedness. And so I'm giving reports that were both put together. Sorry about that. So anyway, these are the 6 areas of work that we explained to you the last time we met. And I'll give you an update. There's been progress made on the first 3, and then we'll talk about the last 3 in a little bit. So first, the safety and security risk assessment, resource needs assessment, school emergency operations plan, and classroom emergency procedures we're working on, and then crisis management and communication plan, training, and continuous improvement will come at a later date. So just in terms of the progress we're making on the first one, the school safety and security risk assessment, we're sharing the process and protocol for this with the principals and police representatives tomorrow, and possibly also the fire department representative. 3 schools are being assessed this spring, Baker and Pierce next week, and the high school on the 21st. The assessments will be led by Don Schmidt of Preparedness LLC, who's done this in schools all over Massachusetts and all over the country, using a tool and assessment protocol that is proprietary to Preparedness. And that work this spring with those 3 schools allows him to train a district team that will then lead the assessment to the rest of the schools. Okay, it's building, it's cost effective, but it's also building capacity internally for us to do this on an ongoing basis. And so we'll keep doing so. Sorry, wasn't on. Another reason for us to come back later and do another update. And so in terms of the school-based personnel at these assessments and district-based personnel, I'll go through in a moment what they do and what they look for, but I just first want to talk about the teams. So the district-based personnel, which will be will be at all the schools whenever we do this. So Director of Operations, that's Matt Gillis, Deputy Superintendent of Finance Administration, Mary Ellen Dunn, obviously, myself, and then the Supervisor of Custodial Services, that's Ed Clancy. The school-based personnel will be typically always the principal, typically a vice principal involved as well. And then the list of staff here are ones who participate at different points during the day. So you think of the district personnel and the principal being involved throughout the whole assessment, the whole day. Then you have the nurse, head custodian, kitchen manager, and the others who come in just for when we're looking at their area or their part of the building, that sort of thing. And then the areas of assessment that the school safety and security risk assessment looks at are these areas here. I won't read them aloud to you. You can read them, of course, but it's a comprehensive assessment of the facilities inside and out, not only the building but the learning spaces. You see also procedures such as emergency planning, things like fire drill procedures, mechanical systems. It's quite a comprehensive look at both what's in existence and what's working, but also risk or areas of improvement. Each assessment will result in a report and recommendations. That's usually shared. The initial recommendations and sort of results of the report are shared verbally at the end of the day meeting and debrief, and then written up comprehensively after that. I'm going to go on to the next area in a second. Any questions just about the school safety and security risk assessments?
Well, I guess it's a question that I don't expect an answer to now, but it certainly catches my attention that we're going to hire this expert Preparedness LLC to come in and assess 3 buildings and then train our own team, and then we're going to expect our team to pick it up and do the additional assessments. I mean, there are 2 concerns. One is just being up to speed and being able to do the assessment at the quality that we need, and the other is simply the bandwidth of our people and whether we can really expect that Mr. Gillis and all that, that without and I understand the cost implications, but again, I don't expect an answer now, but I just would raise the question about whether that's really realistic or whether you want to get through all of the assessments with the outside consultant.
That's part of doing 3 and doing the 3 types of buildings that we're doing sort of out of the gate with preparedness. I've done these assessments with preparedness. It's a really, really, really thorough template, and so we'll evaluate sort of where we are and what we think is going to be reasonable to do, and also in terms of the timetable, because ideally we would be trying to do some of these things before September for the rest of the buildings and getting them done. And typically the assessments are done not always during the school year. There's a big piece of it that is done when the school is empty, and then there's a piece that's done when the school is actually in operation. And so we're very excited if fire can join in with us. That will actually help us significantly in being able to do it ourselves. So we'll know that more after the 21st.
Any other questions on the risk assessments? Okay. Then also resource needs assessment, and this is really in terms of sort of for lack of a better term, a paper review, a document review. We've already shared all our existing documents on procedures and policies and everything from phone lists to crisis teams to policies and procedures with Don Schmidt, and he is currently beginning a review of those. And the intent there is to see if there are gaps. There are gaps with current practice and current sort of best practices. Which the reason we're confident there are gaps is because the field has been developing so rapidly, and we haven't reviewed these since the most recent review was 2014, and much hasn't been changed since prior to that. And then part of the school emergency and this is, let me just clarify this. This is more of documentation we have that helps us in responding. I'm not saying that well. How would you describe the documents we shared, which we've shared so much with them? Because it's sort of the...
I think it's as Ben has described, as where there are gaps, both policy, communication plans, directions, directives. We have this red book that is out of date and really not a best. There are many things that are in there that are not best practice, and sort of what do we need to do to update many of those documents. One document, we need a number of different documents published and posted for family members and anybody in the community, and those aren't posted. It's just there's a checklist of things that we need, and what do we need and what's missing.
Yep. And then a specific area of that are the school emergency operations plans and classroom emergency procedures. If you think of 2 guidebooks, one is in every classroom and every office, and those are actual procedures that people need to follow in the case of an emergency, and a very broad range of emergencies, everything from, in some ways, a child being ill to to a fire drill to a toxic spill that's outside the building, that sort of stuff. So they're the classroom emergency procedures, and then there's if you think of the sort of administrative manual, what's the overarching for the whole entire district? That's the school emergency operations plan. The drafting of those revised plans is underway with being led by Don Schmidt. It'll be modeled after the U.S. Department of Education's Readiness and Emergency Management for School Standards and Guidance. Again, they are the industry standard. We expect a first draft of both of these by August 1st, and at that point we'll begin a review process, which of course will begin with all of you. And then,
and there are just to be clear, there are several districts that have just recently gone through this process and produced the same, for sort of colloquially, it's the Red Book in Brookline. Yeah. That's the procedure manual.
And just in terms of there's different. There's what information is in there, make sure it's up to date and up to standard. There's also the the formatting and the actual physical book itself. And we've already reviewed with a number of principals, folks at the high school as well, some samples of those just to get a sense of which direction we move in terms of the book and the formatting. So we had some good input on that from folks in our schools, and now we're working on the actual content, which of course is more important. And then the last pieces of these, we need to be putting the review into place first and making progress on the areas we just showed you, and then we can get further into the planning around crisis management communications, training, which is essential, but those will come later. We're staging things essentially. So I think that's it for tonight. Any further questions?
Do we have a policy or a suggested policy on doors to our buildings, if they're open or locked, or are we thinking about that? Are we happy with what we've got?
So I'm glad you asked. The doors need to be locked during the school day, and not locked to keep the community out, but locked so that our students and our staff have that last barrier or something to slow someone down. And I think there's no better example of why that's important than the fact that, as the committee knows, somebody walked into Runkle School off of the playground, and the community had a long tradition of leaving the playground door unlocked and not using the key cards that were available that everyone has, or everyone should have, and the key card reader. And if you think about just that incident, had the doors been locked, the person could have walked up to the door, but would have had to interface with someone before coming in. And so those doors are now locked. And I think that it's important. We had one other school that was not locking the recess doors, and those are now locked as well. All of our other schools were in the habit of having those doors locked. And I think that it's an important reminder to all of us, and I said this to our PTO leaders yesterday morning, and I'll say this to the committee, that there are certain systems that you put in place, like just making sure that the doors are locked during the school day, that is not in any way, shape, or form about changing the fabric of the community of the school, because all of our families and our students and everyone is welcome at the school. It's about having that moment where you can't just walk in unimpeded. It doesn't mean that it's foolproof, and it doesn't mean that if you really want to get in, you can't figure out a way, but it's that unimpeded access that's problematic. And the PTO leaders really appreciated and understood that, and that's a long answer to your question. Our doors need to be locked. And an important next question that is actually a part of this review is, our schools operate for much longer with community resources and extended days, and many of the buildings unlock at 2:30, and Mary Ellen and Ben are working and beginning the process of understanding from both our extended days and the community partners, whoever they may be, from rec to the Brookline Music School, what are the needs, and there will be some recommendations that will come to you to consider. And there is a question, the important questions are being raised within each of our school communities about that practice, which is longstanding. And it is a balance of the building being open, and our buildings should be community resources and community centers, but we also want to make sure that the kids and the adults who are using that building have that sort of consistent level of procedure. So that question of sort of 2:30 to whenever is a part of this review.
We are actually coordinating with the town, so town and school, for all town employees to have badges, lanyards, whatever you want. In terms of buildings, we'll have different lanyards. I'll have a different lanyard. But I should be walking into a school with an ID badge and a lanyard of some sort in every school, as well as every town employee. And those badges will be those badges will have security features in them too. And we're including our partners. So the extended day programs are part of this process and part of the ID badge process and part of our security features, so that we don't have so part of the biggest problem in a a campus of the number of buildings we have and the number of doors we have is keys. And so we have solved that problem and that concern so that we can use systems and features that we already have in place to make it easier for the after-school program staff to access the building within security parameters that we're all comfortable for them to have. And for teachers to access and staff to access buildings and doors that they need to access during the day that are under the parameters we should have. So we've spent a long time this past year working with the town departments and the unions to get agreements with the town departments. We'll be coordinating with them. So you'll probably see over the next, starting in September, October, you'll start seeing municipal employees and school department employees in mass rather than pockets, because right now we have pockets of municipal departments and schools that wear badges, but everyone will have a badge.
So theoretically, for recess, when they go out to recess, they don't have to prop the door open because they will have badges to get in. So there's a key badge
and the
scanner.
after-school teachers
program
too.
will have
So
them as well.
they'll be at all the doors, or at least the doors.
The doors they need to access.
need
They
to
won't be at all the doors because it's not reasonable or appropriate to have it all the doors, but the doors that are most frequently accessed, they'll be there.
Thank you.
Mr. Perlman and then Ms. Scotto.
Could you elaborate on what the the current procedures are in terms of how many doors approximately are open, how many are locked? So I regularly go into schools in Boston, and often what I find, there might just be the main door open. Sometimes even that's locked. And you get buzzed in, you go in, you identify who you are, and that seems like a very safe way to go. So I'm just wondering what we do now.
So what we have is we have we have our doors open for arrival and drop-off, typically locking at 8, in some instances 8:05, but typically 8. And so that's something so that the timing of that is consistent. It should be 8 o'clock. Many of our schools have the doors unlock at 2:15 or 2:20, and then have areas where families will congregate, typically on the first floor. Depending on the school, it varies. If there's a lobby area, sort of awaiting pickup. The big exception to that is the high school, which is open campus between the buildings, and part of it is. I think that is going to be it's the most challenging question to resolve, because we have an open campus and we have a multi-building campus, and so I think that we're looking forward to getting some suggestions out of the report on the 21st on what are some best practices that we could use in terms of how our high school can operate, understanding that students need to be able to transition between the buildings, and sort of where and how and what are the number of doors that should happen through. Is it 8? Is it 15? It's not 60? So that's a really important question for the high school.
Particularly because is it a mindset change? Because college campuses have figured this out, and they have multiple buildings, multiple campuses, and some of their doors are all locked. So college campuses, and so part of it is looking at what are the best practices in and around college campuses who have multiple building sites that are secured. So there are any number of different things we're looking at. And I just want to add to that, phase 2 of our badging system is also about parent access to make it efficient and easier for parents to access the building through the system that we are looking at townwide. Also has a guest badge entry type of process, and so that's phase 2, is to look at that piece so parents can, if they have a license, they can scan it some outside and they'll be recognized and get buzzed through, so they can buzz themselves through because they're already pre-checked, and kind of, so we're looking at that next level for parent access, or people who should have permission, who we're not going to issue an ID to, but have a driver's license or have some sort of ID or coding system. So that's phase 2.
And I think I just want to, I state this a lot when I talk about the work that we're doing around safety and security in our schools, and we are all very much holding the importance within our community of the openness and the welcoming nature of our schools, and understanding that we need to have appropriate systems in place because that is what provides the safety that we need to have for our students and for our staff. And so we are very much holding both of those as we embark on this process, and we'll continually bring this information to the committee, because this is really this is important for you to both have and ask questions about and make decisions about. And this is really needs to be an inclusive, both comprehensive and inclusive process.
Ms. Scotto. Oh, we're all.
Yes, no, I have one.
Okay, Ms. Charlevsky.
Well, one of the things that I hope we keep in mind is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because I do fear that we won't be an open and inclusive place, especially at the high school. One of the beauties of the high school is everybody feels they're responsible for the high school, and I want to keep that. I want teachers to be asking, why are you here, or who are you? My name is so-and-so. Who are you? Why are you here? In a nice way. I think that's the best kind of security you can ever have, because anybody can open a door. I've had it open for me in every single school here, where a kid comes and just opens the door for me, Now, I may look very innocent, but that's not the point.
Well, and to that point, a school like Driscoll, where the doors are locked, there is still that culture of, oh, can I help you?
Right.
Who are you looking for? So I don't think that the two, as long as if we do it right, the two are not contradictory. And so I think that's, I hear your point about the high school, and I use that as an example to say that both can be accomplished.
All right. Thank you very much. We are on to our subcommittee and liaison reports. Finance is meeting next week, and our chair is not here. Ms. Charlevsky, do you have any reports for us?
Well, first of all, Capital is meeting on Tuesday from 4 to 6. I was able to go to the job meeting at Devotion School on Tuesday morning and took a tour of the school, and furniture is being delivered on one side of the building, and it's scheduled to be delivered on the other side, I think, in the next month or so. As with every project, it's hard. It's hard to get to the finish line, and we're working on it. I'm trying to think if there was anything else about the Devotion School. No, that's it.
Is there any more information about the potential delay?
Not yet. The contractor is saying they're going to finish by July 31st, that we will get the certificate of occupancy. Temporary. Probably will be a temporary certificate of occupancy, because there's always something that can't get done. Excuse me. But that's what they're saying. And we're keeping our fingers crossed. I think, unless anybody wants to add anything else to that, I think, more to be, July 9th we'll know more. I think that's when our workshop is.
Do you have a government relations report for us?
Just do one more?
Yeah, sure.
So I just want to, Ms. Dunn and I received information from Charlie Simmons right before this meeting. I updated you last week that the air conditioning that town meeting approved for Lincoln, Lawrence, and Heath, the back hallway of Heath, was ordered and on track, and that remains to be, that's still true. The original bids, Charlie was hoping to get bids for the Driscoll School project that would allow work to start later this summer. He did not. He got bids that came in significantly. He actually only got one bid, and it came in significantly over budget. So he's going to need to rebid it, and thinks that when he rebids it a little bit further into the summer, he's hoping that he will get multiple bids. So that's just. It is certainly a project that will take at least a year, but I just wanted to update you that the initial bid process only netted one bid that I think, if I'm remembering correctly, came in at least $1.3 million over what town meeting approved. So Charlie will continue working on it, and I have every confidence because Charlie pulls off most projects with on the timeline and within the budget that was approved by town meeting. But just so that you have that information, that's where the initial, what happened with the initial bid.
And just to update people, I was your representative on the CM at Risk interviews for the high school. We have rank ordered them, and Ray Masick is in the process of getting a contract together, which we hope to have. As soon as we have it, I would appreciate it. Even if we have to call a special meeting, I think it would be a good idea to move that forward quickly. We had 4 very good companies, and I don't think I'm allowed
I haven't
to
heard
say
the result.
anything
You're
yet.
not?
No,
All
I
right.
don't think so.
Okay.
So stay tuned. We'll keep you in suspense.
Good enough.
I don't think it's public. That's fine.
That's all right. I'm sure you picked a good CM. Ms. Scotto, curriculum.
We will be having our final meeting of the year on Thursday, June 14th, a week from today. There we will be looking again at the BHS competency report. The math program review will have a quick update and a curriculum coordinator report.
Thank you. Mr. Glover.
Government relations.
Oh, okay, I'll come back to you. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
I skipped curriculum and asked you about that one, but then we didn't get to it. Mr. Glover.
Okay. Policy Subcommittee met on Wednesday of this week. As Ms. Miller indicated earlier, the discipline policy is being revised and will be brought back at some point in the fall. Meal charge policy, I believe, will be brought for first reading at the next meeting and for second reading and possible vote at the workshop this summer. Same with the homeschooling policy. I believe it'll be brought for first reading next time. And I know Dr. Gittens is not in here, but I think that's right. Yeah, and again, a second reading and possible vote at the workshop. Wellness. There are some revisions to the wellness policy that need to be made in order to comply with state law. So I think there's not much we can do about that. As a result of that, I think that will be brought at the next meeting for a vote. We're not going to do a first reading, second reading, because we don't really have any choices or any choice over the changes that need to be made in order to comply with law. I don't know if that's already... Okay. Since you're coming up, remind me what the change is about.
So I have to just get the language from the state. So we had the language right in a November version. It has to do with when non-compliant foods can be sold. And the Mass Department of Public Health has a stringent guidance of midnight to 30 minutes after school. And yes, that means no food sales in the morning through the school day till 30 minutes after school. We have in the policy an old state policy, state regulation, which used to be 30 minutes before school to 30 minutes after school. So I am learning that midnight is actually the first minute of the new day, whenever that new day is. So as opposed to 11:59 being the end of the day prior. So we have to just change that language. We don't really have a choice, and I just need to get that. It's a sentence change, and that'll be put in a track change on the policy, and I'll give it to Robin to get posted so it's out published. But it doesn't change. In effect, doesn't really change anything significant.
Yeah, so it's a non-substantive change, which is why we're not going through the normal process for a change to policy. So, and our meeting Wednesday was the last one of the year.
Thank you. Ms. Charlevsky.
So I think everybody gets the Mass Association of School Committees emails, and there was an email on supporting legislation implementing the Foundation Budget Commission recommendations. Does everybody get that? Yes. Yeah? Okay, good. So the issue is we need to call our representatives. because it has passed the state Senate. It's really an important bill which will help us financially. And they need to get it out of the representatives in the House need to get it out so that it can be approved, voted on and approved, hopefully. So it's Senate Bill 2525, but I don't know what the House bill number is. That's it.
Thank you. Are there other additional liaison and reports and updates and/or updates? Is there any new business to come before the committee? Okay, we stand adjourned.